My name is Zoe Washington, and at 32 years old, I thought I understood how the world worked. As a forensic risk analyst for top-tier firms in Chicago, I hunt down fraud for a living. I find the missing numbers, the buried secrets, and the lies people tell to save themselves. But I never thought the biggest fraud I would ever uncover would be my own parents. At 4 a.m. last Tuesday, pounding shook my front door like a battering ram. A deputy sheriff stood on my porch holding papers that would shatter my life. Eviction order. Immediate effect. My name was printed on it like I was some stranger in my own home. My parents were across the street watching quiet, satisfied. My mom called out, "You should have done what family asked." My dad said, "Pack." This is happening today. I did not scream. I did not cry. I asked the deputy, "Can you show me who filed this?" He checked the top line, paused, and his face changed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who mistook your kindness for weakness. The sound that woke me was not a normal knock. It was a violation. Fist against solid mahogany, the kind of sound that bypasses the ears and rattles the ribcage. I sat up in bed, gasping, my heart hammering against my silk pajamas. The digital clock on my nightstand read 4:03 a.m. For a split second, I thought it was a dream, or maybe a fire alarm, but then it came again. Boom, boom, boom. Police, open up. The voice was deep, authoritative, and brooked no argument. Panic is a cold thing. It started at my toes and shot up to my throat. I grabbed my robe, wrapping it tight around my body, as if the thin silk could protect me from whatever nightmare was waiting on the other side of my door. I did not even have time to find my slippers. The hardwood floor was freezing against my bare feet as I ran down the hallway. Through the frosted glass panels of the front door, I could see them, red and blue lights strobing violently, cutting through the darkness of my quiet, upscale subdivision. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the latch. When I swung the door open, the humid Atlanta night air hit me, followed immediately by the beam of a heavy-duty flashlight. Deputy Sheriff Miller. I read the name tag on his chest before I looked at his face. He was a large man, thick-set, with a face that looked like it had seen too many domestic disputes and not enough sleep. He did not lower the flashlight. "Mom, are you Zoe Washington?" His voice was flat, devoid of empathy. I shielded my eyes from the glare. "Yes. What is going on? Is someone hurt?" I tried to look past him towards the street, thinking maybe there had been an accident. But the street was empty of traffic. Just his cruiser parked at an aggressive angle in my driveway, and across the street a familiar black pickup truck. "This is an order for immediate eviction pursuant to a court order filed by the property owners. You need to vacate the premises immediately." The words did not make sense. They floated in the air like smoke. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of sleep. Eviction. That is impossible. I own this house. I bought it 5 years ago. I have the deed. I pay the mortgage. You have the wrong address. Deputy Miller sighed, a heavy sound of impatience. He thrust a clipboard toward me. "Address is 4502 Oakwood Drive. Occupant Zoe Washington. Owners Harold and Beatrice Washington. The order is signed by a judge, ma'am. It says you are occupying the property without a lease, and the owners have exercised their right to reclaim possession." My knees almost gave out. Harold and Beatrice. My parents. My gaze snapped past the deputy to the black pickup truck parked across the street. The engine was idling, sending plumes of exhaust into the red and blue lit air. 2 figures stood by the hood. They were not close enough for me to see their eyes, but I knew that posture anywhere. My father stood with his arms crossed over his chest, a stance of immovable stubbornness. My mother stood slightly behind him, clutching her purse. They were not looking at the ground. They were not looking at each other. They were looking right at me. Watching. Waiting. It was an ambush. A calculated cold-blooded ambush executed in the dead of night, so I would have no time to call a lawyer, no time to fight back. I looked back at the deputy fighting to keep my voice steady. This is a mistake. A fraudulent filing. My parents do not own this house. I do. You cannot kick me out at 4 in the morning based on a lie. The deputy stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. Mom, I am just executing the order. You can take it up with the court on Monday. Right now, you need to step out. You have 5 minutes to grab essentials. If you resist, I will have to arrest you for trespassing. Trespassing. In the house where I picked out every light fixture. In the house where I spent my weekends refinishing the floors. The absurdity of it burned hotter than the anger. I did not move. I stared at the deputy, and then back at my parents. My mother stepped forward slightly into the pool of light from the street lamp. Her voice carried across the quiet morning air, sharp and piercing. Stop making a scene, Zoe. You brought this on yourself. We told you we needed the asset. You chose to be selfish. Now you deal with the consequences. The asset. That is what I was to them. Not a daughter. Not a human being. Just an obstacle between them and whatever financial mess they had gotten themselves into this time. Mom! The deputy's voice hardened. Now. I looked down at my bare feet. I looked at the warm, inviting glow of my living room behind me. My laptop was on the coffee table containing the digital evidence that could probably prove my ownership, but he was not going to let me touch it. I turned to run back inside to grab my purse, my phone, anything. He blocked me with a stiff arm. Essentials, Mom, do not make me cuff you. I managed to snatch my trench coat from the coat rack by the door and my cell phone, which was sitting on the entry table. That was it. That was all I was allowed to take from the life I had built over a decade. I stepped onto the porch, my legs numb. The deputy followed me out, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind him. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed like a gunshot. Click. That was it. I was locked out. I stood there shivering in my silk pajamas and a trench coat, barefoot on the concrete, while the deputy sheriff pasted a neon orange notice on the wood. Warning. No trespassing. I looked across the street again. My father opened the driver's side door of his truck. He did not look at me anymore. He just got in and started the engine. My mother lingered for a second longer, a look of twisted triumph on her face, before she climbed in beside him. They drove away slowly, leaving me standing in the driveway as the deputy walked back to his cruiser. I was alone. I was homeless. And I was absolutely furious. But as I watched their taillights fade into the darkness, I realized something. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything. They did not know that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because they forgot one thing. I am a risk analyst, and I never enter a war without an exit strategy. The taillights of my parents' pickup truck disappeared around the bend, but the humiliation was far from over. I stood there on the concrete driveway, shivering not just from the morning chill, but from the absolute violation of what had just happened. The silence that followed was heavy and judging. I could feel eyes on me. To my left, I saw the blinds twitch in the window of Mrs. Higgins' house. She was the neighborhood watch captain, a woman who lived for gossip. By noon, the entire homeowner association would know that Zoe Washington, the successful risk analyst, had been thrown out of her own home like a common criminal. I pulled my trench coat tighter around my silk pajamas, trying to maintain a shred of dignity. But it is hard to look dignified when you are barefoot and shivering at 4 in the morning. Then headlights swept across the lawn, blinding me momentarily. A white Range Rover pulled up to the curb, screeching to a halt right where the deputy's cruiser had been moments before. I knew that car. I paid the lease on that car. The driver's side door opened, and my brother-in-law Kyle stepped out. He was wearing a tracksuit that looked too expensive for a man who had not held a steady job in 3 years. He did not look at me. He walked around to the trunk. But it was the passenger door opening that made my stomach turn. Tiana stepped out, my younger sister. The golden child. Manana. Even at this ungodly hour, she looked put together. Her hair was wrapped perfectly in a silk scarf, and she wore a matching cashmere lounge set that probably cost more than my first car. She did not run to me. She did not look horrified. She walked up the driveway with the casual confidence of someone arriving at a spa appointment. She stopped 3 feet away from me, invading my personal space just enough to be uncomfortable. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my bare feet. "Rough night, Zoe," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was soft, almost melodic, the voice she used when she wanted to pretend she was the victim. But her eyes were dancing with excitement. I stared at her, incredulous. "You knew about this. You knew Mom and Dad were going to file that order." Tiana let out a small sigh, checking her manicured nails. "Knew about it. Zoe, I encouraged it. We have been planning this for weeks. You have been so busy with your little spreadsheets and your business trips, you did not even notice we changed the locks on the back gate, did you?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Planning. For weeks. While I was paying for their dinners, while I was buying gifts for the baby she was carrying, she was plotting to make me homeless. Kyle slammed the trunk shut. He dragged 2 large suitcases onto the pavement. My suitcases. The hard shell ones I used for international travel. He rolled them up the driveway and shoved them toward me. They spun out of control and toppled over, crashing onto the concrete with a sickening crack. "We packed for you," Kyle said. His voice was smug, dripping with a false sense of authority. "We didn't want you to have to come back inside. Everything you need is in there. Clothes, toiletries, your laptop. We were thorough." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had been in my room. They had gone through my drawers, touched my things, decided what was essential and what was trash. The violation was so intimate it made me want to vomit. "Why?" I whispered. My voice sounded small and broken, which I hated. "I gave you everything, Tiana. I let you stay here when Kyle lost the apartment. I paid your debts. Why take the house?" Tiana stepped closer, closing the gap between us. She reached out and brushed a piece of lint off my trench coat, a gesture so patronizing it made my skin crawl. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of peppermint and expensive coffee. She lowered her voice to a whisper so the neighbors watching from their windows would not hear the venom. "Because you do not deserve it, Zoe," she hissed. "Look at you. You are cold. You are hard. You are empty. This house is 4,000 square feet of wasted space with you. It echoes. It is depressing." She placed a hand on her stomach, rubbing it ostentatiously. "This baby needs a home, Zoe. A real home. This house needs the sound of children running down the halls. It needs laughter and life. It does not need the sound of your keyboard clicking away at midnight while you obsess over other people's money. We are doing the house a favor. We are bringing life to it. You are just a ghost haunting the guest room." She pulled back, flashing a bright, fake smile for anyone who might be watching. Kyle walked up behind her, putting a protective hand on her shoulder, acting the part of the dutiful husband. "You should go," Kyle said, dismissing me like a servant. "The Uber is on its way. We called it for you. Goes to the Motel 6 on the highway. Don't come back, Zoe. If you step on the property again, we will call the sheriff for trespassing. And this time he won't be as polite." They turned their backs on me. I watched them walk toward my front door. Kyle fished a keyring out of his pocket. My keyring. The one I thought I had lost 2 days ago. He unlocked the door and held it open for Tiana. She paused on the threshold, turning back to look at me one last time. She did not wave. She just smirked, a small, satisfied curling of her lips that said, "I won." Then they stepped inside and the heavy oak door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the neighborhood, final and absolute. Then I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood there alone on the sidewalk next to my toppled suitcases. The sky, which had been threatening all morning, finally broke. It started as a drizzle, cold and miserable, then quickly turned into a steady gray rain. The water soaked through my trench coat, instantly plastering the silk pajamas to my skin. It ran down my face, mixing with the mascara I hadn't fully removed. I looked down at my suitcases. One of them had popped open from the force of Kyle's throw. A sleeve of my favorite blazer was sticking out, getting soaked in the muddy puddle forming on the concrete. I did not move to fix it. I just stood there, letting the rain wash over me. The cold was seeping into my bones, but strangely, the panic was gone. In its place, something else was forming, something hard and cold and sharp. Tiana was right about one thing. I was a risk analyst. I spent my life looking at numbers, looking at patterns, finding the weakness in the system. They thought they had won because they had the keys. They thought they had won because they had the parents on their side. But they had made a fatal calculation error. They assumed I was just a sister. They assumed I would react with emotion. They forgot that I dismantle billion-dollar corporations for a living. I looked at the closed door of my house, rain dripping from my nose. You want the house, Tiana, I thought. You can have the house, but you have no idea what comes with it. And by the time I am done with you, you will wish you had stayed in that rental apartment. I reached down, grabbed the handle of my wet suitcase, and turned my back on the home I loved. The game had just begun. The flashing neon sign outside my window buzzed with a rhythmic, irritating hum, casting a sickly pink glow across the peeling wallpaper of the motel room. Vacancy. No vacancy. Vacancy. It was the only place I could find within walking distance that accepted cash, because as I had just discovered, my credit cards were useless. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, still wearing my damp trench coat over my silk pajamas. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and despair, a sharp contrast to the lavender and sandalwood scent of the master bedroom I had woken up in just an hour ago. But I did not cry. Crying is for people who have run out of options. I was just recalculating. I pulled my phone from my pocket, wiping the screen on a dry patch of the bedspread. My battery was at 12%, enough time to assess the damage but not enough to waste. I opened my banking app. Face ID recognized me, but the screen that loaded made my breath hitch in my throat. Account locked. Contact branch administrator. I swiped to my savings account. Zero balance. I swiped to my investment portfolio. Frozen pending investigation. A cold laugh escaped my lips, a sound that startled me in the quiet room. Of course. How could I have been so blind? When I was 18 and heading off to college, my father had insisted on opening a joint student account with me. For emergencies, he had said, to help you manage your tuition. Over the years, as I climbed the corporate ladder and started making six figures, I had simply linked my new high-yield accounts to that original profile for convenience. I never removed his name. I never thought I needed to. I analyzed risk for billion-dollar mergers, yet I had left a backdoor open into my own financial life for the people who were supposed to protect me. They had not just evicted me, they had executed a complete financial decapitation. They knew that without money, I could not hire a shark lawyer. Without money, I could not even pay for a decent hotel, let alone a deposit on a new apartment. They wanted me broken. They wanted me to come crawling back to them, begging for forgiveness, so they could magnify their benevolence by taking me in as a charity case. I could hear my mother's voice in my head saying, "See, Zoe, you always need us in the end." I stared at the zero balance, and the anger that had been a cold knot in my stomach flared into a white-hot rage. They thought this was checkmate. They thought that by taking my shelter and my resources, they had taken my power. But they forgot where I worked. They forgot that my job was not just about numbers, it was about finding the truth when everyone else was trying to hide it. I was a forensic risk analyst. I tracked down embezzlers who were smarter than my father and con artists who were more charming than my sister. I closed the banking app. I would deal with the money later. Right now, I needed information. I needed to know exactly what was happening inside that house. My house. I looked at the time. 4:48 a.m. Most people would be paralyzed by the shock. Most people would be curled up in a ball waiting for morning. I was not most people. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a name that was listed simply as tech support. It was actually the personal number of Jax, the head of cybersecurity at my firm. We had worked a case together last year involving a corrupt CEO in Hong Kong, and Jax owed me a favor for keeping his name out of the subpoena. I pressed call. It rang once, twice. Then a groggy voice answered. Zoe. It is 5 in the morning. Is the server down, Jax? I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I need to activate Ghost Protocol. There was a pause on the other end. The sleepiness vanished from his voice, instantly replaced by professional alertness. Ghost Protocol. Zoe, that is, for corporate espionage cases. Are you in trouble? Is the firm compromised? Not the firm, I said, standing up and walking to the window. I pushed the curtain aside, watching the rain fall on the empty parking lot. My personal assets have been compromised by hostile actors. I need immediate remote access to a localized network, specifically the smart home system at 4502 Oakwood Drive. Jax hesitated. That is your house, Zoe. You want me to hack your own house? I don't want you to hack it. I said, my reflection in the window, looking back at me, fierce and determined. I want you to bypass the new user credentials. The hostile actors have changed the physical locks and likely the Wi-Fi password, but they won't have reset the hardwired security mainframe in the basement. They are not smart enough for that. I need a backdoor, Jax. I need to see and hear everything that is happening in that living room. Right now. I could hear the sound of typing on the other end. Rapid, rhythmic keystrokes. You know, this is technically a gray area, legally speaking, Jax muttered, but I could hear the excitement in his voice. He lived for this stuff. If you are the owner on the deed, I can argue you authorized the penetration testing. Give me 30 seconds. The neon sign outside buzzed loudly, flickering off for a second, before blazing back to life. Vacancy. My parents thought they had left me with nothing. They thought they had emptied my life. But as I waited for Jax to work his magic, I realized they had only cleared the board for me. They had removed the distractions. No more playing the dutiful daughter. No more pretending to tolerate their toxicity. I am in, Jax, said his voice triumphant. They changed the Wi-Fi password to TianaHome2024. Pathetic security. I have patched the feed directly to your phone. You have visual on all 6 internal cameras and audio. Do not let them see the red light on the lenses, Zoe. I killed the LED indicators so you are completely invisible. Thank you, Jax, I whispered. I owe you a bottle of that scotch you like. Make it 2, he said and hung up. I looked down at my phone screen. A grid of 6 images popped up. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, my office. And there, in high-definition night vision, was my living room. My parents were sitting on my white Italian leather sofa, popping a bottle of champagne. My champagne. Tiana was walking around the room, touching my sculptures, claiming my space. I plugged in my earbuds and turned up the volume. The audio crackled to life, and the first thing I heard was my father's laugh. A loud, booming sound of satisfaction that I used to crave as a child, but now sounded like the roar of a monster. I sat back on the motel bed, the pink neon light washing over me. I was cold. I was broke. I was homeless. But as I watched them toast to my destruction on the tiny screen, I smiled. Because now I was the fly on the wall. And they had no idea that the house they had just stolen was wiretapped by the rightful owner. Let the show begin. I dragged my damp suitcase onto the bed and unzipped the wet lining. My hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from anticipation. Miraculously, the waterproof sleeve of my laptop case had done its job. I pulled out the sleek silver machine and pressed the power button. The Apple logo glowed a soft, reassuring white in the dim motel room. I connected to the spotty motel Wi-Fi and synced the feed Jax had established. The small screen of my phone was not enough. I needed to see every pixel. I needed to see the ink drying on the page. I navigated the timeline of the security footage, scrolling back through weeks of mundane motion-detected events. The cleaning lady, the dog walker, me coming home late from work exhausted carrying takeout. Then I found it. Timestamp 3 weeks ago. Friday night. I remembered that night. I was in New York for a compliance audit. I had called home to check in, and my mother had told me they were just having a quiet evening watching movies. On the screen, the living room was bright and cheerful. But they were not watching movies. The dining room table, which I had imported from Italy, was covered in paperwork. My mother Beatrice sat at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in her hand. My father Harold was pacing behind her. And there sat Kyle, my brother-in-law, holding a pen with the intense concentration of a toddler learning to write. I turned up the volume on my laptop. The audio was crystal clear. "No, that is too shaky," Kyle muttered, crumpling up a piece of paper and tossing it onto a pile of others. "Her Z has a sharper tail. Look at the sample on the mortgage deed." "Just keep practicing, honey," my mother cooed, refilling her glass. "You have almost got it." "Remember, the clerk at the county office is Brenda's son. He won't look too closely as long as it resembles the original. We just need it to pass the initial scan." I watched in horror as my mother pushed another blank transfer form toward him. They were practicing my signature. They were sitting in my house drinking my wine and methodically learning how to become me on paper. My stomach churned. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was not a desperate act of parents needing cash. This was a workshop on felony forgery. But what came next made my blood run cold. My father stopped pacing and leaned over the table, placing his hands on the wood. What if she fights it? Beatrice Zoe is not stupid. She knows the law. If she hires a forensic accountant before the loan goes through, we are finished. My mother took a slow sip of wine and smiled. A smile I had seen her use on neighbors she hated. A smile that never reached her eyes. Let her fight. Who is going to believe her? She is a single, overworked woman in her 30s with no husband and no children. We paint the narrative, Harold. We tell everyone she is having a breakdown. The stress of the job finally got to her. She laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "I have already planted the seeds with Reverend Thomas, told him Zoe has been acting erratic lately, talking to herself. Paranoia. If she tries to sue us, we petition for a competency hearing. I still have Dr. Evans' number from when her cousin had that episode. A 72-hour psychiatric hold will keep her busy long enough for the ink to dry and the money to clear." My father nodded slowly, seemingly comforted by the idea of institutionalizing his own daughter to cover his tracks. "That is smart. A 5150 hold. By the time she gets out, the house will be in Tiana's name and the cash will be in ours. She will just look like a hysterical woman ranting about a conspiracy." I paused the video. My finger hovered over the spacebar, freezing my mother's face in that grotesque, self-satisfied smirk. The silence in the motel room was deafening. I sat there staring at the people who raised me. They were not just thieves, they were predators. They were willing to use my mental health, my reputation, and my freedom as leverage for a quick payout. They were ready to lock me away in a padded room and drug me into silence just so Tiana could have a nursery and Kyle could drive a Range Rover. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I wiped it away instantly. That was the last tear they would ever get from me. Grief died in that moment, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. I downloaded the clip. Then I downloaded the entire 48-hour buffer. I backed it up to 3 separate cloud servers and an encrypted drive. I looked at the screen one last time. My mother looked so confident, so untouchable in her plotting. She thought she was playing a game of chess against a child. She thought she could flip the board and I would just cry about the mess. She did not realize that while she was playing checkers, I was rewriting the rulebook. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound was loud, sharp, and final, like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. I stood up and walked to the dirty mirror hanging over the motel dresser. My hair was a mess. My eyes were rimmed with red, but the woman looking back at me was someone new. "You want to play dirty mother?" I whispered to the reflection. "You want to talk about laws. You want to use the system against me. Fine. You played by the rules of the jungle where the strong eat the weak, but you forgot that civilization has different rules. I am not going to sue you. I am not going to argue with you. I am going to annihilate you. You wanted a breakdown. I will give you a breakdown. But it won't be mine. It will be the systematic dismantling of every lie, every asset, and every shred of dignity you have left. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus, my lawyer. It was 5:15 a.m. I did not care. "Wake up, Marcus," I said, when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. "And do not ask me if I am okay. I am far from okay. I am ready to go to war. I have the evidence. I have the motive. And I have the footage. We are not just filing a civil suit, we are filing for criminal conspiracy. I am playing for the death penalty." The elevator doors chimed, opening onto the 42nd floor of the Sterling Tower in downtown Chicago. The air up here was different. It was recycled cool and smelled faintly of ozone and ambition. I stepped out wearing my armor, a bespoke black pantsuit sharp enough to cut glass and stilettos that clicked rhythmically against the marble floor. The receptionist looked up and smiled, but I walked past her with a singular focus. Today, I was not the homeless woman shivering in a motel room. Today, I was Zoe Washington, Senior Forensic Risk Analyst, and I was about to go to work on the hardest case of my life. I walked into my corner office and closed the glass door. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The gray morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows was enough. It cast long shadows across my desk where 3 monitors sat waiting. I placed my latte down, but I did not drink it. My hands were steady as I logged into the terminal. The company software hummed to life, a complex web of databases, credit bureaus, and asset tracking algorithms that I use daily to hunt down corporate embezzlers. Usually I was looking for CEOs hiding money in the Cayman Islands. Today I was looking for the reason my parents had sold their souls. I started with my father, Harold Washington, a man who prided himself on being a pillar of the community, a man who lectured me about compound interest when I was 10 years old. I pulled his Social Security profile and cross-referenced it with the national banking database. The screen populated with numbers and graphs. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the data. It was a bloodbath. 6 months ago, my father's retirement portfolio was healthy. He had worked 30 years at the plant to build that nest egg. But starting in February, the withdrawals began. $10,000 here, $15,000 there, then a massive lump sum withdrawal in April. He had cashed out his entire 401k, taking a massive tax penalty in the process. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Dad, what did you do?" I traced the wire transfers. The money did not go to medical bills. It did not go to home repairs. Every single cent was funneled into a business account registered to one person, Kyle Jenkins, my brother-in-law. The account was labeled K Ventures LLC. I typed Kyle's name into the search bar. If my father's finances were a tragedy, Kyle's were a horror movie. Kyle had positioned himself as a visionary entrepreneur, telling the family he was building the next Bitcoin. But the numbers told a different story. I pulled his credit report. It was lit up like a Christmas tree with red warnings. Defaulted car loans, maxed out credit cards. But the most terrifying part was the inquiry section. In the last 3 months, his credit had been pulled 5 times by high-risk subprime lenders. The kind of lenders who operate out of strip malls and charge 400% interest. The kind of lenders who have associates that break kneecaps when you do not pay. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the spider web of debt on my screens. The picture was becoming crystal clear. Kyle was not just a failure. He was a gambler. He had convinced my father to invest his life savings into a crypto scheme that had obviously collapsed. Now the money was gone. The retirement fund was gone. And the loan sharks were circling. That explained the urgency. That explained why they evicted me at 4 a.m. instead of asking me to leave. They did not just need a place for Tiana to live. They needed an asset. They needed something solid, tangible, and valuable to throw into the gaping maw of Kyle's debt before he got hurt or arrested. And I was the only one in the family with equity. I typed my own address into the property search bar, 4502 Oakwood Drive. The system flagged a new filing timestamped just 4 hours ago, right when the courthouse servers opened. A rush request for a home equity line of credit. My parents had used the forged deed to apply for a second mortgage against my house. They were leveraging 80% of the home's value. My fingers flew across the keyboard accessing the bank routing system. I needed to know if the funds had cleared. Usually these things took days, but with the right connections, or the right amount of desperation, things could be expedited. I found the transaction ID. Status dispersed. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at the destination account. It was not my father's account. It was not a joint account. The funds had been wired directly to a personal checking account solely in Kyle's name. Amount $500,000. I stared at the number. I stared. $500,000. That was the price of my betrayal. That was what I was worth to them. My parents had stolen my home, kicked me out into the rain, and stripped me of my sanctuary just to hand a $500,000 check to a man who had already burned through their life savings. They were throwing good money after bad, trying to bail out a sinking ship by tearing planks off my lifeboat. I looked at the time on the transaction. 9:02 a.m. The money had hit Kyle's account exactly 12 minutes ago. He was probably staring at his phone right now, feeling like a king. He probably thought he had pulled off the heist of the century. He had the house, he had the money, and he had the golden child wife. I took a slow sip of my cold latte. The bitterness matched the taste in my mouth. They had moved fast, faster than I expected. But in their haste, they had made a critical error. By wiring that money across state lines to pay off illicit debts, they had just escalated this from a family dispute to federal wire fraud. And by using a forged deed to secure a bank loan, they had committed mortgage fraud. I printed the transaction receipt. The sound of the printer whirring was the only noise in the office. I picked up the warm piece of paper, holding it up to the light. It looked like a receipt for a standard bank transfer, but to me it looked like a confession. "You just handed me the gun, Kyle," I whispered to the empty room. "And you were kind enough to load it for me too." I picked up my phone. It was time to make the first move. I was not going to stop the transfer. I was going to let him spend it. Because the only thing worse than going to prison for fraud is going to prison after you have already spent the money and have nothing left to show for it. I saved the file into a folder named Operation Eviction. Then I turned my attention to the next tab. It was time to see just how deep Kyle's rabbit hole went. If he owed money to dangerous people, I needed to know their names. Because when his house of cards collapsed, I wanted to make sure I was standing far enough away to watch it burn without getting singed. Sunday morning at Mount Zion. AME Church was usually a sanctuary. It was where the air smelled of floor wax and expensive perfume, where the sunlight filtered through the stained glass, depicting the saints in vibrant blues and reds, and where the heavy velvet of the pews absorbed the sins of the weak. But as I pushed open the heavy double doors that morning, I felt the atmosphere shift instantly. The low hum of conversation in the vestibule died out. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I was wearing my best Sunday suit, a tailored cream blazer and matching trousers that screamed professional success, but the looks I received were not of admiration. They were looks of pity mixed with disgust. The kind of looks reserved for the fallen. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking against the hardwood. Usually Mrs. Gable, the head usher, would greet me with a hug and ask about my job. Today she pretended to be busy straightening a stack of hymnals, turning her back to me as I approached. I could hear the whispers rippling through the congregation like a poisonous wave. "There she is. I heard she lost her mind. Drugs, they said. Her poor parents." The words hit me like physical blows, but I kept my chin up. I scanned the room looking for the source of this sudden social quarantine. I found her in the front row. My mother Beatrice was holding court with the Women's Guild. She was wearing her wide-brimmed navy hat, the one she saved for funerals and tragedies. She had a handkerchief pressed to her eyes, and her shoulders were shaking with practiced theatrical sobs. A circle of women surrounded her, patting her back and clucking their tongues in sympathy. I moved closer, my hearing sharpening to pick up the narrative she was spinning. We had no choice, Beatrice wailed, her voice pitched perfectly to carry across the sanctuary without seeming loud. We found the needles in her bedroom, under the mattress. Can you imagine? My Zoe, my baby girl. We had to sell the house to pay for a private rehabilitation facility in Malibu. It is $40,000 a month, but what else could we do? We could not let her end up on the street. My blood ran cold. Needles. Rehab. She wasn't just explaining away the eviction, she was assassinating my character. She was painting me as a heroin addict to explain why they had taken my home and why I was suddenly broke. It was brilliant in its cruelty. If I tried to deny it, I would just look like an addict in denial. If I got angry, I would look unstable. She had weaponized my silence against me. I stepped forward intending to march right up to that pew and demand the truth. I wanted to ask her which rehabilitation center she had paid because I had seen the bank transfer to Kyle's account just hours ago. But before I could take 3 steps, a large hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned to see Reverend Thomas. He was a tall, imposing man who had known me since I was a child. Usually his face was warm. Today it was a mask of solemn disappointment. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path to my mother, effectively walling me off from the congregation. "Zoe," he said, his voice deep and rumbling, "this is not the time or the place." "Reverend," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice, "you cannot believe this. You know me. I do not do drugs. My parents have stolen my home. They are lying to you." The Reverend shook his head slowly, a gesture of condescending pity. "Addiction is a powerful demon, child. It makes us say and do terrible things. It makes us turn on the ones who love us most. Your mother and father came to me yesterday in tears. They showed me the paperwork. They are heartbroken, Zoe. They are only trying to save your life." The paperwork. Of course. They probably showed him the forged transfer deed or maybe even fake medical records. My parents were thorough, I would give them that. They had co-opted the highest moral authority in our community to validate their crime. "I am not an addict, Reverend," I said, my voice hardening. "I am a victim of fraud, and you are aiding and abetting criminals. Creating a scene in the house of God will only prove their point." "Zoe," the Reverend whispered, leaning in close. "Look at yourself. You are shaking. You are aggressive. Go with peace. Let your parents help you. We are all praying for your deliverance." He was not going to move. If I pushed past him, I would be the aggressor. I would be the crazy daughter attacking a man of God. I looked over his shoulder. My mother had stopped crying. She had lowered the handkerchief and was watching me. Her eyes were dry, cold, calculating. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod as if to say, "I told you so." I realized then that I had lost this battle. I could not win in the court of public opinion, not when the judge and jury had been tampered with. But the war was far from over. I took a deep breath, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. I stepped back, releasing myself from the Reverend's grip. "Fine," I said loud enough for the nearby pews to hear. "I will leave, Reverend. I would hate to disrupt the performance." I sidestepped him and walked until I was parallel with my mother. I did not scream. I did not cry. I waited until she looked at me, expecting me to beg or break down. Instead, I smiled. It was the sharp, terrifying smile of a predator who has just spotted a limp. "You are putting on a great show, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the hushed air. "The crying is a nice touch. Very convincing. I hope God believes you, because the forensic auditors I hired this morning definitely won't." Beatrice's face faltered. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of genuine fear. She knew what that word meant. Auditors. She knew I wasn't talking about rehabilitation. I turned on my heel and walked out of the church. The silence that followed me was different this time. It wasn't just judgment, it was uncertainty. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, but I didn't care. Let them pray for me. They were going to need those prayers for themselves when the truth came out. I walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. My car was the only one moving. As I drove away, I saw the Reverend watching me from the steps, looking less like a shepherd and more like a man realizing he might have just bet on the wrong horse. I checked my phone. I had a missed call from Tiana. The rats were getting nervous. Good. My Mercedes hummed down the interstate, putting miles between me and the toxic theater of Mount Zion AME Church. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. I was not shaking anymore. The anger had crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. I had just watched my mother publicly execute my reputation to save face, and I knew exactly who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. As if summoned by my thoughts, the Bluetooth system in my car chimed, interrupting the silence. The name on the dashboard display made my jaw tighten. Tiana. I debated letting it go to voicemail. I could picture her leaving one of her breathless, passive-aggressive messages playing the victim even when she was the aggressor. But I needed to hear her voice. I needed to gauge her confidence level. In my line of work, you never ignore a signal from the opposition. I tapped the answer button on the steering wheel. "Hello, Tiana," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You have a lot of nerve, Zoe." Tiana's voice filled the cabin of the car, sharp and piercing. I could hear background noise, the hum of hairdryers, the chatter of women. She was at the salon. Of course she was. While I was scrambling to rebuild my life, she was getting a pedicure, probably using the cash my parents had stolen from me. "I have nerve," I repeated, keeping my eyes on the road. "I am not the one who forged a deed and kicked my sister out at 4 a.m. Stop being dramatic, Zoe." Tiana sounded bored. "Mom called me. She was crying. She said you accosted her at church. You embarrassed her in front of the Reverend. Do you have any idea how stressful that is for her? She is trying to help you, and you go there looking like a lunatic trying to start a fight. Help me." I laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Is that what we are calling grand larceny now, helping? You just can't stand it, can you?" Tiana's tone shifted, dropping the fake concern and sliding into pure venom. "You can't stand that for once in your life. You are not the center of attention. Growing up, it was always Zoe, the genius. Zoe, the scholarship student. Zoe, the big-shot corporate executive. You thought you were better than us. You looked down on us from your high tower in the city." "I never looked down on you, Tiana," I said quietly. "I paid for your college tuition. I paid for your wedding dress. I helped you because I loved you." "You bought us," Tiana snapped. "You used your money to control us, to make yourself feel superior. But money doesn't make you family, Zoe. Loyalty makes you family." And when push came to shove, Mom and Dad realized who was actually there for them. They realized who was going to give them grandchildren, and who was going to die alone with a bank account full of cash. "So that is what this is about?" I asked, merging onto the exit ramp. "You think this is a competition?" "I think I won," Tiana said, and I could practically hear the smirk in her voice. "Mom and Dad chose me, Zoe. They chose my family. They chose my husband. They realized that my happiness was more important than your ego. They gave me the house because I am the one who brings joy to this family. You just bring judgment." I listened to her rewrite history, listened to her justify theft with the language of love. It was fascinating in a morbid way. She truly believed she was the hero of this story. She believed that her inability to support herself was a virtue, and my independence was a sin. "Tiana, listen to me very carefully," I said, slowing the car down as I pulled into a side street. "Mom and Dad did not choose you because they love you more. They chose you because you are weak. They chose you because they can control you. I was the one asking questions. I was the one checking the books. You are just a vessel for their vanity. You are the golden child as long as you do exactly what they say." "You are just jealous," Tiana scoffed, but her voice wavered slightly. "You are jealous because I have a husband who loves me and a baby on the way and parents who would do anything for me. You have nothing, Zoe. You are empty." I stared at the red light ahead of me. The rain had started again, drumming rhythmically on the windshield. "Speaking of your husband, Tiana," I said, softening my voice to a dangerous whisper. "Does he know you are spending money at the salon today? Did he tell you where the money came from?" "Kyle is a provider," Tiana said, defensive now. "He takes care of me." "Kyle is a liability," I corrected her. "And since you are so proud of being chosen, let me give you a piece of advice. Ask Kyle about the $500,000 that hit his account this morning. Ask him about the men he owes money to in South Chicago. Ask him why he needed my house to keep his kneecaps intact." Silence on the other end of the line. The background noise of the salon seemed to fade away. "What are you talking about?" Tiana whispered. "I am talking about reality, Tiana. The reality you are too busy being pampered to see. Mom and Dad didn't give you the house to build a nursery. They gave you the house to pay off a loan shark. You are not the golden child. You are the collateral. You are lying." Tiana shouted, her voice cracking. "You are just trying to scare me. You are a bitter, lonely witch and you want to ruin my happiness." "I am not trying to ruin anything," I said calmly. "I am just the risk analyst, and I am telling you the market is about to crash. Enjoy your pedicure, Tiana. I hope it was worth your soul. Good luck with Kyle's debt. You are going to need it." I disconnected the call before she could respond. The silence rushed back into the car, but this time it felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clear. I had planted the seed. Tiana was delusional, but she wasn't deaf. She would ask Kyle. Kyle would panic. And when rats panic, they start to bite each other. I signaled left and turned the car toward the downtown district. I had a meeting with a lawyer to prepare, and I needed to be ready when the implosion began. The first domino had just been tipped. The Blue Note was exactly the kind of place where people went to bury secrets or plot revolutions. It was tucked away in a basement in the South Loop, the air thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and the low, mournful wail of a saxophone. I walked in the heavy velvet curtain closing behind me, shutting out the rainy city streets. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, scanning the leather booths, until I found him. Marcus. He was sitting in the back corner, nursing a neat scotch, wearing a suit that cost more than my father's truck. We had gone to law school together before I pivoted to risk analysis, and he became one of the most vicious litigators in Chicago. He was the only person on earth I trusted with the nuclear codes I was about to unleash. I slid into the booth opposite him. I did not say hello. I simply reached into my oversized tote bag and pulled out the manila envelope containing the fruit of my morning's labor. I slid it across the polished mahogany table. It hit his glass with a soft clink. Marcus looked at the envelope, then at me. His eyes narrowed, taking in the tension in my jaw, the way my hands were clasped too tightly together. "You look like hell, Zoe," he said, his voice a deep baritone that had charmed juries for a decade. "I heard about the eviction. The rumor mill in this town moves faster than fiber optics." "Read it," I said, signaling the waitress for a double vodka on the rocks. Marcus opened the envelope. He pulled out the stack of papers, the high-resolution photos of the forged deed, the transcript of the security camera footage where my parents discussed committing me to a psych ward, the bank transfer receipt showing the $500,000 loan hitting Kyle's account. As he read, his professional mask began to crack. His eyebrows shot up. His jaw tightened. When he got to the forensic report on Kyle's debts to the subprime lenders, he actually let out a low whistle. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, dropping the papers back onto the table. "They forged your signature with a 95% match. They filed a quitclaim deed without a notary present, which means they bribed a clerk, and now they have leveraged the asset to the tune of 500 grand. Zoe, this is a slam dunk. We can file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. I can have a judge freeze that account by noon. We can get you back in that house before the weekend." I took a long swallow of the vodka, letting the burn settle my nerves. "No," I said calmly. Marcus stared at me, his glass halfway to his mouth. What do you mean, no, Zoe? Look at this. They are bleeding you dry. If we do not freeze that account, Kyle is going to spend that money. Once it is gone, it is gone. You will be left with a mortgage you did not sign for, and a house stripped of its equity. I leaned forward, the candlelight casting shadows across my face. That is exactly what I want, Marcus. I do not want to stop them. I want them to finish the transaction. He looked at me like I had grown a second head. Explain. If we stop them now, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, my parents will play the victim card. They will say it was a misunderstanding. They will say they were just trying to manage family assets and made a mistake. They will cry in front of a judge, claim senility, or claim I verbally authorized it. It becomes a messy civil dispute. He said, she said. And in the court of public opinion, I am still the ungrateful daughter suing her elderly parents. I tap the paper, showing the bank transfer. But if Kyle spends that money, the narrative changes. Once that $500,000 leaves his account and goes to pay off his illegal gambling debts, it is no longer a civil dispute. It is felony wire fraud. It is money laundering. It is grand larceny. I do not want a settlement, Marcus. I want handcuffs. I want prison time. I want the kind of federal charges that do not come with parole. Marcus sat back in the booth, running a hand over his trimmed beard. He studied me with a mixture of admiration and fear. You are using the house as bait. You are letting them hang themselves. I am letting them dig the grave they started. I corrected him. I did the math, Marcus. The house is worth $800,000. The mortgage is $400,000. Even if they drain the equity, I can recover the loss through insurance fraud protection once they are convicted. But I cannot recover my reputation if I look like the villain. I need them to be undeniably, irrevocably guilty. I need Kyle to wire that money to the sharks. I need Tiana to buy her designer nursery furniture. I need them to feel safe. Marcus shook his head slowly. You are cold, Zoe. I knew you were tough, but this is surgical. They tried to have me committed, Marcus. I said, the memory of the video footage flashing in my mind. They were going to lock me in a psych ward to shut me up. Being cold is the only reason I am not sitting in a padded room right now. He nodded, conceding the point. He picked up the documents and slid them back into the envelope. Okay. We play it your way. We wait. We document. I will draft the criminal complaint, but I will not file it until you give the signal. But Zoe, you need to be careful. He leaned across the table, his expression darkening. I know the type of people Kyle owes money to. I represented a guy last year who crossed them. These are not bankers. These are people who solve problems with tire irons. If Kyle gets desperate, if he realizes the walls are closing in, and he has already spent the money, he is going to look for a scapegoat. And right now, you are the only one standing between him and a life sentence. I finished my drink and placed the glass down on the coaster with a deliberate thud. Let him come, I said, grabbing my bag. Kyle thinks he is a player because he learned how to forge a signature. He has no idea he is playing against the house, and the house always wins. Marcus didn't smile. He just watched me stand up. You are playing with fire, Zoe, he warned softly. I fixed my collar, checking my reflection in the dark mirror behind the bar. No, Marcus, I am just holding the match. They are the ones soaked in gasoline. I walked out of the Blue Note and back into the rain. The city felt different now. It wasn't a place of refuge anymore. It was a hunting ground. And for the first time in 24 hours, I didn't feel like the prey. I hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of a short-term rental apartment uptown. I had a war room to set up. Kyle had his money. Tiana had her house. My parents had their pride. But I had the clock. And every tick was bringing them closer to midnight. The roar of a twin-turbo engine shattered the afternoon peace of Oakwood Drive, reverberating through the laptop speakers in my temporary uptown apartment. I leaned closer to the screen, watching the high-definition feed from the security camera I had installed above the garage door years ago. A cherry-red Porsche 911 GT3 skidded into the driveway, barely missing the mailbox before coming to a jerking halt right where my sensible sedan used to park. The driver door flew open and Kyle stepped out. He was wearing aviator sunglasses and a grin that looked ready to split his face. He patted the hood of the car like it was a loyal pet, oblivious to the fact that he had just parked a $200,000 liability in the driveway of a stolen house. I paused the video and zoomed in on the paper license plate. It was a temporary tag from a luxury dealership downtown. I quickly ran the numbers in my head. The loan they had taken out against my equity was $500,000. After closing costs and the bribe money they likely paid to expedite the paperwork, they walked away with maybe $480,000. This car-base model starts at $170,000. With the custom rims and the sport package Kyle had clearly opted for, he had just blown nearly 40% of their heist money on a depreciating asset in a single afternoon. The front door of the house opened and Tiana spilled out. She was holding her phone up on a selfie stick, live streaming to her 5,000 followers. She squealed a sound that grated on my nerves even through the digital audio feed and ran toward the car. Kyle scooped her up, spinning her around like they were in the finale of a romantic comedy. It was grotesque. They were celebrating their crime, broadcasting their felony to the world. I opened a separate window on my laptop and navigated to Instagram, finding Tiana's profile. The little ring around her photo said live. I clicked on it. The angle switched from the overhead security camera to Tiana's shaky handheld view. Her face filled the screen, filtered to perfection. "Hey guys, welcome back to the channel," she chirped, her voice breathless. "Look what Daddy just brought home. We are so blessed, you guys. When you trust in the Lord and cut out the toxic people in your life, abundance just flows." Toxic people. That was me. I was the toxin. I watched as she panned the camera over the sleek curves of the Porsche, then back to the house. My house. She walked up the driveway, the camera shaking as she gestured to the manicured lawn I used to mow myself. "We are finally settling into the new estate," she said, emphasizing the word estate like she was British royalty. "The energy here is so much better now that we have cleared out the old vibes. You know how some people just bring dark clouds wherever they go? Well, we are all about light and love here. Look at this nursery window. Baby Jenkins is going to have the best view in the neighborhood." Comments started rolling in on the side of the screen. Heart emojis. Fire emojis. People congratulating them on the glow up. I recognized some of the usernames. Cousins. High school friends. People who had ignored my calls for the last 3 days were now in her chat, dropping praise hands. I opened a spreadsheet on my second monitor. I had titled it Asset Dissipation Log. I typed in the date, the time, and the item. Porsche 911 GT3. Estimated cost $200,000. Evidence Instagram live and security feed 04. Tiana climbed into the passenger seat of the car, laughing as Kyle revved the engine again. "It sounds like a beast, right?" she shouted over the noise. "Kyle says we deserve this. We have been working so hard building our empire in silence, and now it is time to make some noise. Working hard." Kyle had not worked a documented hour in 3 years, but something in that sentence made me pause. Building an empire. He felt safe. That was the only explanation. He felt so safe, so untouchable that he thought he could drive a supercar around town without consequences. And then it hit me. The realization was so sharp, I almost laughed out loud. Kyle had not paid the loan sharks. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. A smart criminal would have taken the stolen money and immediately paid off the dangerous debts. That was the whole reason they needed the house in the first place, to save his kneecaps. But Kyle was not a smart criminal. He was a narcissist with impulse control issues. He saw $500,000 hit his account and his brain short-circuited. He thought he could buy the car, impress the neighbors, and maybe double the rest of the money at the casino or on another crypto bet before the sharks came calling. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, but he had just bought a Ferrari with Peter's money, and Paul was still waiting in the alley with a baseball bat. This changed everything. I thought I would have to wait months for them to bleed the account dry, but Kyle was accelerating the timeline. He was practically sprinting toward his own destruction. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a burner phone I had bought at a convenience store with cash. It was a cheap plastic flip phone, the kind drug dealers and paranoid risk analysts used. I powered it up, the screen glowing a dull blue. I had spent the morning digging through the dark web forums and cross-referencing Kyle's gambling habits until I found the contact info for the syndicate he was indebted to. They were a sophisticated operation based out of South Chicago, run by a man known only as the Bookie. I typed in the number. My thumbs hovered over the keypad. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this message, I was no longer just an observer. I was an active participant in the chaos. I looked at the screen where Tiana was now posing on the hood of the car, making a duck face, while Kyle kissed her pregnant belly. They looked so happy, so oblivious. I typed the message slowly, ensuring every word was calculated for maximum impact. Your boy Kyle Jenkins just bought a 2024 Porsche 911, red, parked at 4502 Oakwood Drive. Looks like he has cash to burn, but not for you. I read it over. It was simple, factual, and absolutely lethal. I pressed send. On the screen, Kyle was laughing at something Tiana said. He looked like a man without a care in the world. He had the girl, he had the house, he had the car. He had no idea that a text message was currently traveling through the cell towers, bouncing off a satellite and landing in the pocket of a man who did not believe in forgiveness. I watched for a few more minutes, but the joy had gone out of their performance for me. They were not celebrating a victory, they were dancing on a landmine. I closed the laptop and tossed the burner phone onto the couch. The first domino had fallen. Now I just had to wait for the explosion. The courier arrived at my glass-walled office just after 2 in the afternoon. He was holding a parcel that looked less like mail and more like a royal decree. It was wrapped in pearl white paper with gold foil stamping, and the bow on top was made of actual silk. I signed for it with a heavy heart, knowing exactly what it was, before I even saw the return address. My parents and Tiana did not do things by half measures, especially when they were spending other people's money. I placed the box on my desk, clearing away a stack of forensic audit reports to make room for this intruder. I reached for my letter opener, a heavy brass instrument that felt more like a dagger in my hand today. I sliced through the tape with surgical precision. The top fell open, revealing a bed of preserved white roses. Nestled in the center was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. The scent of fresh flowers filled the sterile air of my office, a cloying sweetness that made me nauseous. I pulled the envelope out. It was heavy, textured, the kind of cardstock used for state dinners or royal weddings. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering. The Jenkins family cordially invites you to a celebration of new beginnings. Beneath that, in a font so swirly it was almost illegible, were the details. The housewarming, the gender reveal, the christening of the estate, all happening this Saturday at 4502 Oakwood Drive. My address, my sanctuary, now their stage. But it was the smaller handwritten note clipped to the back of the invitation that made my blood boil. I recognized the penmanship immediately. It was my mother's tight, looping script, the same handwriting that used to sign my report cards and write check marks on her chore lists. I unfolded the note, my eyes scanning the words that were designed to cut deeper than any knife. Zoe, we are praying that you have found some peace since Sunday. We know you are hurting, but do not let your pride destroy this family. Tiana wants you there. She wants her big sister to share in her joy. Please come and bless the house. Show everyone that you can be the bigger person. Learn to be generous in spirit. Do not make this about you, and do not embarrass your father and me again. We love you. Mom. I stared at the paper. The audacity was breathtaking. Learn to be generous. I had given them hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. I had paid off debts. I had funded vacations. And now, after they stole my home and slandered my name, they were asking for generosity. They were weaponizing the concept of forgiveness to silence me. This invitation was not an olive branch. It was a trap. If I did not go, they would tell everyone I was bitter and jealous, just like Tiana said. They would say I was too selfish to celebrate my nephew. If I did go, I would be forced to smile while they paraded around my house, treating me like a guest in my own living room. I would be a prop in their play, a silent endorsement of their theft. It was a lose-lose situation, a perfect psychological pincer move designed by Beatrice Washington. A surge of pure, unadulterated rage shot through me. I crumbled the heavy, expensive cardstock in my fist. I did not care that it probably cost $20 a unit to print. I crumpled the note, the invitation, the preserved roses. I swept the entire box off my desk with a violent shove. It hit the trash can in the corner with a satisfying thud, the beautiful white flowers spilling out onto the office floor among the shredded paper and coffee cups. I am not going, I said aloud to the empty room. I am not going to be their puppet. I am not going to watch Kyle pretend he is the king of my castle. I walked to the window looking out at the Chicago skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gray. I watched the traffic far below, tiny cars moving in predictable patterns. Risk assessment is about predicting patterns. It is about understanding human behavior. My parents expected me to stay away, or they expected me to come and cause a scene so they could play the victim again. They had scripted this whole weekend. But then I remembered the text message I had sent an hour ago. The message to the loan sharks. Kyle was going to be at that party. He was going to be surrounded by people feeling invincible, and he was going to be right where the sharks could find him. If I stayed away, I would miss the fallout. If I stayed away, I would be relying on second-hand reports. But if I went, I turned back to the trash can. The gold edge of the invitation was glinting under the fluorescent lights. If I went, I could ensure that the police arrived at the perfect moment. I could ensure that when the handcuffs came out, there would be an audience. They wanted a celebration, fine. I would give them a spectacle. They wanted me to bless the house. I would bless it with the truth. I walked over to the bin and reached in. I pulled the crumpled invitation out, smoothing the wrinkles against the surface of my desk. The gold foil was cracked. The paper was bent. It looked damaged. Imperfect. Just like this family. I looked at the date. Saturday. 2 days away. That was enough time. Enough time to coordinate with the sheriff. Enough time to make sure the foreclosure notice I was preparing was printed on legal-size paper. Enough time to find a dress that would make Tiana's sequins look like costume jewelry. My mother wanted me to be the bigger person. She wanted me to show up. Be careful what you wish for, Beatrice. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. Change of plans, I said when he answered. Do not file the injunction yet. We are going to the party. Zoe, are you sure? Marcus asked, his voice wary. That is walking into the lion's den. No, Marcus, I said, staring at the crumpled invitation. It is not a lion's den. It is a crime scene. And the detective always returns to the scene of the crime. I will be there. And I am bringing a +1. Make sure the sheriff is ready. I pinned the invitation to my corkboard right next to the surveillance photo of Kyle signing the forged deed. It fit perfectly. The crime and the cover-up side by side. I sat back down and opened my laptop. I had 48 hours to prepare my performance. If they wanted a show, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I would be the gracious sister. I would be the loving daughter. I would smile and eat their hors d'oeuvres and toast to their happiness. And then when they least expected it, I would burn the whole production to the ground. I picked up the pen and wrote 2 words on the bottom of the crumpled invitation. Accepted. Pending. The pending stood for pending arrest, pending justice, pending doom. I smiled for the first time that day. See you on Saturday, Mom. Make sure you polish the silver. You are going to need it to pay for your bail. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive calm. While I was in my office preparing the legal noose, my father, Harold Washington, walked into the downtown branch of Sovereign Trust Bank. He was wearing his best navy suit, the one he usually reserved for board meetings at the church. He walked with a new strut, a swagger that had not been there a week ago. In his mind, he was no longer just a retired factory supervisor living on a fixed pension. He was a real estate mogul. He was the patriarch of a wealthy family. He had evicted the ungrateful daughter and reclaimed his throne. He approached the teller window with a smile that was meant to be charming but came off as arrogant. He needed cash for the party. The caterers demanded a final deposit, and Tiana had insisted on a live jazz band that required payment up front. Harold slid his debit card across the marble counter with a flourish. "Good morning, young lady," my father boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet bank. "I need to make a withdrawal. $5,000. Large bills, please. The party of the century does not pay for itself." The teller, a young woman named Sarah, who had helped him for years, smiled politely and took the card. "Of course, Mr. Washington. Let me just pull up your profile." She typed on her keyboard, the rhythmic clicking sound filling the silence. My father drummed his fingers on the counter, humming a hymn under his breath. He was already mentally spending the money, imagining the praise he would receive from the guests when they saw the lavish spread. Suddenly the typing stopped. Sarah frowned. She squinted at the screen, then typed something else more forcefully. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of confusion and professional concern. My father, who was busy checking his watch, did not notice the shift immediately. "Is there a problem?" Harold asked when the silence stretched too long. Sarah cleared her throat. She did not look him in the eye. "One moment, Mr. Washington. The system is giving me a weird prompt. Let me just call a supervisor override." My father's drumming fingers stopped. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. Supervisor override. He knew what that meant. It meant something was wrong. But he pushed the fear down. It was probably just a daily limit issue. After all, the account was flush with cash now thanks to the loan against my house. The branch manager, Mr. Henderson, walked over. He looked grave. He whispered something to Sarah, who nodded and stepped back. Mr. Henderson turned to my father. "Mr. Washington, could you please step into my office for a moment?" My father's face flushed hot. He looked around to see if anyone was watching. "Why?" "I just want my money. It is my money. I have a party to organize. Please, sir." Mr. Henderson said, his voice firm. "It is about your account status. We cannot process this transaction at the window." Harold followed the manager into the glass-walled office, his legs feeling suddenly heavy. He sat down in the leather chair, clutching his hat in his hands. Mr. Henderson did not offer him coffee. He sat behind his desk and folded his hands. "Mr. Washington, as of 9 a.m. this morning, your accounts have been frozen pending an internal investigation." "Frozen." My father repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "What do you mean, frozen?" "I have money in there. My son-in-law just deposited a significant sum." "That is exactly the problem, sir," Mr. Henderson said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "The bank's fraud detection algorithm flagged multiple irregularities. The massive influx of funds from a home equity loan followed immediately by large outgoing wire transfers to accounts associated with high-risk gambling entities. And then, this morning, we received a notification from a third party regarding potential identity theft and deed forgery associated with the collateral property." My father felt the blood drain from his face. Deed forgery. They knew. Somehow they knew. He felt the room spin. He gripped the armrests of the chair to keep from falling over. "Who?" he whispered. "Who notified you?" "I cannot disclose that information during an active investigation," Mr. Henderson said. "But until this is resolved, we cannot release any funds. Your assets are locked, Mr. Washington. I suggest you contact a lawyer." My father stumbled out of the bank 5 minutes later. The sun was shining, but he felt cold. He walked blindly to his truck, his hands shaking so hard he dropped his keys twice. He scrambled inside and locked the doors, breathing heavy, panicked breaths. He needed answers. He needed reassurance. He dialed Kyle. The phone rang 4 times before Kyle picked up. "Yo, Dad, what is up? We are just picking up the champagne." "Kyle," my father hissed, clutching the phone with a sweaty hand. "I am at the bank." They froze the account. They said something about fraud. They said something about the deed. Kyle, they know. There was a silence on the other end. Then a laugh. A relaxed, unbothered laugh that made my father want to scream. Dad, relax. Kyle said, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. You are panicking over nothing. It is just a system glitch. I moved some big money around this morning to hide it from the tax man. You know how these banks are. They get spooked when they see real wealth in motion. But they said forgery. Kyle, my father pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. They used the word forgery. That is just standard banking jargon, Kyle interrupted, dismissive. Look, I have a guy on the inside. I will make a call and get it cleared up by Monday. It is just a security hold. Standard procedure for high net worth individuals. We are rich now, Dad. We have to deal with rich people problems. My father listened to the smooth, confident lies. He wanted to believe them. He needed to believe them. If he did not believe them, then he was not a rich patriarch. He was a criminal who had just lost everything. So I can't get the cash for the band, my father asked, his voice small. Use your credit card, Kyle said, or tell them I will pay double on Monday. Just handle it, Dad. Do not let a computer glitch ruin Tiana's big weekend. I have to go. I am looking at a Rolex. Later. The line went dead. My father stared at the phone. For the first time in years, a crack appeared in his blind faith. Kyle sounded too casual, too slick. My father looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He saw an old man with gray hair and fear in his eyes. He saw a man who had betrayed his own daughter for a dream that was starting to feel like a nightmare. He started the truck. He would use his emergency credit card. He would pay for the band. He would smile at the party. He would pretend everything was fine. Because the alternative was admitting that Zoe was right. And Harold Washington would rather die than admit he was wrong. He pulled out into traffic, telling himself one more lie. It is just a glitch, just a glitch. But deep down in his gut, the cold, hard stone of dread was starting to settle. He was driving a truck, bought with lies, towards a party paid for with theft, and he had a terrible feeling that the road was about to run out. The dress hung on the back of the rental apartment door like a crimson stain against the white paint. It was not a sensible dress. It was not the kind of dress a forensic analyst wore to board meetings, or the kind of dress a dutiful daughter wore to a family gathering. It was a weapon made of silk. I ran my hand down the fabric, feeling the cool slip of the material. It was blood red, vibrant, and aggressive, a color chosen specifically to draw every eye in the room. Tiana would be wearing white or pastel pink, playing the role of the innocent Madonna. I intended to walk in looking like the reckoning. But before I could put on the armor, I had one final call to make. The most important call of the entire operation. I sat down at the small glass dining table, my laptop open in front of me. On the screen was a file labeled The Jenkins Dossier. It contained everything. The video footage of the forgery, the forensic handwriting analysis, the bank records showing the wire fraud, the background check on the subprime lenders, and most damning of all, the corporate charter of ZW Holdings, LLC, proving that the deed my parents signed was legally impossible to execute without my biometric authorization. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. It belonged to Sheriff Grueling Patterson, the elected official who oversaw the entire county. He was a man who played golf with my father, a man who had shaken my hand at church picnics. He was also the man whose signature was stamped at the bottom of the eviction notice that had ruined my life 4 days ago. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Sheriff Patterson speaking. Sheriff, this is Zoe Washington. There was a heavy pause on the line. I could hear the creak of a leather chair as he likely leaned back, perhaps annoyed, perhaps embarrassed. Zoe, he said, his voice dropping an octave. I heard about the situation at the house. Look, I know it is a difficult time for your family, but calling me personally isn't going to change a court order. Your parents filed the paperwork. It is a civil matter now. It was a civil matter on Tuesday, Sheriff, I said, my voice steady and cold. But as of 9 o'clock this morning, it became a federal crime. And unless you want your department to be named as an accessory to grand larceny and mortgage fraud, I suggest you check your email. I just sent you a file. I heard the click of a mouse. I waited. The silence stretched out, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette. I took a sip of water, visualizing his face. I pictured him opening the first document, then the second. I pictured the color draining from his cheeks as he realized that Harold Washington, his golf buddy, had played him for a fool. This is a forensic audit, Patterson stammered, the bluster gone from his voice. Zoe, are you saying the deed was forged? I am saying the deed was impossible. I corrected him. Look at page 5. Sheriff, the property is held in a limited liability company. My father signed his name as the grantor. He does not have signature authority for ZW Holdings. That deed is a worthless piece of paper. But the $500,000 they stole from the bank using that paper, that is very real. And the wire transfer to a known illegal gambling syndicate in South Chicago, that is on page 10. I heard him gasp. Gambling syndicate. Kyle Jenkins owes them money, Sheriff. A lot of money. My parents evicted me to liquidate my asset to pay off a loan shark. You didn't execute an eviction order, Sheriff. You executed a robbery. The line went dead silent for 10 seconds. When Patterson spoke again, his voice was hard. He was no longer the family friend. He was a lawman who realized he had been manipulated. Harold told me you were on drugs. He told me you were mentally unstable and destroying the property. He looked me in the eye and swore he was doing this to save you. He lied, I said simply. He used your badge to commit a crime. And right now, Kyle Jenkins is driving a Porsche bought with stolen bank funds. He is hosting a party at the scene of the crime. What do you want? Zoe Patterson asked. I want you to fix it. I don't want a quiet investigation. I don't want a letter in the mail. I want an arrest. I can have a squad car pick Kyle up on Monday, Patterson suggested. We can bring him in for questioning regarding the fraud. No, I said, standing up and walking back to the red dress. Monday is too late. Kyle is desperate and impulsive. He has already spent half the money. If you wait until Monday, he might run. He might destroy evidence. You need to secure him now. I paused, letting the next words sink in. He is having a party today at 4 p.m. All the suspects will be in one location. Harold, Beatrice, Kyle, Tiana. The evidence is inside the house. The car is in the driveway. It is the perfect time to execute a warrant. Zoe Patterson sighed, sounding tired. You want me to raid a gender reveal party? That is going to be a media circus. They made my eviction a public spectacle, Sheriff, I reminded him. They threw my clothes on the street in front of the neighbors. They slandered me at church. I think it is only fair that the truth is just as public. Unless, of course, you want the FBI to handle it, I can call the Chicago field office. I am sure they would be interested to know why the local sheriff's department facilitated a $500,000 bank fraud. It was a bluff mostly. The FBI would take weeks to move. But Patterson didn't know that. He just knew he was holding a grenade. I will have a unit there at 5 p.m., Patterson said, his voice clipped. I will lead it myself. If this evidence holds up, Zoe, your brother-in-law is going away for a long time, and your parents, they are going to have a lot of explaining to do. Thank you, Sheriff, I said. I will see you there. I hung up the phone. The deal was done. The trap was set. Now I just had to dress for the occasion. I stripped off my robe and stepped into the red dress. The silk felt like cool water against my skin. I pulled the zipper up, the sound loud in the quiet room. It fit like a second skin, hugging every curve, a stark contrast to the oversized, frantic figure I had cut on Tuesday morning. I looked in the mirror. The dress was bold. It was unapologetic. It was the color of danger. I sat down at the vanity and picked up a tube of lipstick. It was a dark matte crimson. I applied it carefully, tracing the curve of my lips with steady hands. My mother hated red lipstick. She said it was for loose women. She preferred pale pinks colors that whispered, colors that didn't offend. Today, I wanted to offend. I wanted to scream without opening my mouth. I blotted my lips and looked at my reflection. The sad, betrayed girl who had cried in the rain was gone. In her place was a woman who had leveraged her pain into power. I checked my watch. 3:30 p.m. The party was starting. The guests were arriving, sipping my champagne, admiring my view, believing the lie. They had no idea that the storm was coming. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of the dress. I slipped on my heels, adding 3 inches to my height. I grabbed my clutch, making sure the hard drive containing the backup evidence was safely inside. I took one last look at the apartment, the war room where I had dismantled their deception piece by piece. "Showtime," I whispered to the empty room. I walked out the door, the click of my heels echoing in the hallway like the ticking of a clock counting down to 0. The drive to Oakwood Drive would take 30 minutes, just enough time for them to get comfortable, just enough time for them to think they had gotten away with it. I was not just going to a party. I was going to a funeral, the funeral of their lies. The Uber Black glided to a silent halt at the curb of 4502 Oakwood Drive. Through the tinted windows, I looked at the house. My house. It had been transformed. White balloons cascaded down the front porch like a frozen waterfall. A large banner hung over the garage door reading "The Jenkins Estate" in gold calligraphy. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, a parking lot of rented status symbols, with Kyle's cherry red Porsche parked prominently in the center like a trophy. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cool, recycled air of the car one last time before stepping into the humidity of the Atlanta afternoon. I opened the door and swung my legs out. My red stiletto hit the pavement with a deliberate sharpness. I stood up, the crimson silk of my dress unfurling around me, catching the late afternoon sun. I didn't rush. I moved with the slow, calculated precision of an executioner arriving at the scaffold. The sound of a live jazz band drifted from the backyard, playing an upbeat, frantic tune that clashed with the cold drumbeat of my own heart. I walked up the driveway. The security guard hired for the event, a man I didn't recognize, glanced at his clipboard, and then at me. He opened his mouth to ask for a name, but I simply lowered my sunglasses and looked at him. He saw the dress. He saw the walk. He saw the sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating off me. He stepped back without a word, unhooking the velvet rope. He thought I was a VIP. He had no idea I was the owner coming to foreclose. I stepped through the open front door. The foyer was crowded. The air smelled of expensive roasted lamb, heavy perfume, and deceit. The chatter was loud, a wall of noise that hit me instantly. But as I took my first few steps onto the marble floor, the noise began to die down. It started with the people nearest to the door. They turned, drinks in hand, ready to welcome another guest, but the smiles froze on their faces. It was Cousin Cheryl, Aunt Martha, the neighbors who had watched from their windows while I was evicted. They stared. They had expected the broken, drug-addicted Zoe that my mother had described. They expected a woman in shambles hiding in the shadows. Instead, they saw a woman wearing the color of blood and fire, standing taller than anyone else in the room. The whispers started immediately, a low hiss that traveled through the crowd like a snake. "Is that Zoe? I thought she was in rehab. Look at that dress. Who wears red to a christening?" I kept walking. The crowd parted. People literally stepped back to let me pass as if they were afraid the red silk might burn them if they touched it. I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes fixed on the archway leading to the main living room. Suddenly a figure stepped directly into my path, blocking my way. It was Tiana. She was wearing a flowing white lace gown that looked like a wedding dress repurposed for maternity wear. A flower crown sat on her perfectly curled hair. She looked angelic, soft, and completely fraudulent. She held a glass of sparkling cider in one hand, her other hand resting protectively on her baby bump. Her eyes, however, were not angelic. They were narrowed into slits of pure fury. "Zoe," she hissed, her voice low so the guests behind her wouldn't hear the venom. "What are you doing here? And what are you wearing?" I stopped, towering over her in my heels. I looked her up and down, offering a small, pitying smile. "Hello, Tiana. You sent me an invitation, remember? A celebration of new beginnings." "I didn't think you would actually come," Tiana snapped, stepping closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "And I certainly didn't think you would show up looking like this." "This is a family event, Zoe. A classy event. You look like you are going to a nightclub. Are you trying to steal my spotlight? Is that it? You just can't stand that today is about me and my baby." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh bubbling up from the absurdity of her narcissism. She thought this was about fashion. She thought this was about sibling rivalry. She was rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while I was holding the iceberg. "Relax, Tiana," I said, leaning in close so only she could hear. "I am not here to steal your spotlight. I am here to make sure you get exactly the attention you deserve." Tiana blinked, confused by my tone. She opened her mouth to retort, to make a scene, to call for security, but I cut her off. "Nice house, by the way," I said, glancing around at the familiar walls, the art I had curated, the furniture I had bought. "The decorations are a bit tacky, but the structure is solid. Enjoy it, Tiana. Seriously, soak it all in." "What is that supposed to mean?" she demanded, her voice rising. "It means parties don't last forever." "Little sister," I said. I stepped around her, my red dress brushing against her white lace like a warning flag. Eventually the music stops. I left her standing there, confused and fuming, in the hallway. I walked through the archway and into the main living room. The furniture had been rearranged to create a throne room effect. And there, sitting on my white Italian leather sofa, were the monarchs of this stolen kingdom. My father Harold sat with a cigar in one hand and a tumbler of whiskey in the other, laughing loudly at a joke told by Deacon Jones. My mother Beatrice sat beside him, looking regal, in a silver suit, accepting compliments from a line of admirers. They looked comfortable. They looked proud. They looked like they owned the world. I stopped in the center of the room. The chatter here hadn't died down yet. They hadn't seen me. I stood there for a moment, just watching them. I wanted to remember this image. I wanted to burn it into my memory. The look of absolute, unearned satisfaction on their faces. Because in less than an hour, that look was going to be replaced by something very different. I took a step forward, my heel clicking loudly on the hardwood, and waited for the king and queen to notice that the executioner had arrived. The jazz band struck a final dramatic chord and faded into silence as Kyle tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the room, causing a few guests to wince, but Kyle did not notice. He was too busy basking in the adoration of the room. He stood on the raised stone hearth of the fireplace, effectively turning my living room into his personal amphitheater. He held a flute of Cristal champagne in one hand and the microphone in the other, looking for all the world like a man who had conquered a kingdom rather than one who had stolen the keys. I stood near the back of the room, partially obscured by a large potted palm leaning against a pillar. From this vantage point, I could see everything. I saw the way Tiana gazed up at him from the front row, her hands clasped over her baby bump, her eyes shining with a mixture of love and relief. She truly believed this fantasy. She believed that her husband was a financial genius who had finally struck gold. She had no idea that the gold was fool's gold, and the mine was about to collapse. Kyle cleared his throat, a sound that demanded absolute silence. He flashed his $1,000,000 smile, the one that had charmed my parents into handing over their life savings. "Family, friends, and distinguished guests," Kyle began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Welcome to the Jenkins estate. It warms my heart to see so many beautiful faces here today to celebrate not just our new home, but our new direction." He paused for effect, taking a sip of champagne. He began to pace back and forth on the hearth, the camera of Tiana's phone tracking his every move. I watched him with the detached clinical interest of a biologist observing a specimen under a microscope. You know, people ask me all the time, Kyle continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial volume. They ask me, Kyle, how did you do it? How did you build this empire in such a short time? How did you secure a property like this in one of the most exclusive zip codes in Atlanta? And I tell them it is simple. It is about vision. I stifled a laugh. Vision? It was about forgery. It was about a printer and a scanner and a lack of conscience. But the crowd nodded along, captivated by his charisma. My father Harold was nodding the hardest, puffing on his cigar with a look of profound vindication. Most people, Kyle said, gesturing vaguely with his glass, live their lives in fear. They work their 9-to-5 jobs, they save their pennies, and they think that is safety. They think that hoarding money in a savings account is success. But we know better, don't we? He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed briefly on me. He did not say my name, but he did not have to. The target of his words was unmistakable. There are some people, even in our own family, who do not understand the concept of leverage. Kyle said, his lip curling slightly. They think you hold on to assets tightly. They are afraid to take risks. They are afraid to bet on themselves. They look at a house and see a building. I look at a house and see liquidity. I see capital. I see fuel for the rocket ship. A ripple of laughter went through the room. My mother chuckled, covering her mouth with a cocktail napkin. They were laughing at me. They were laughing at the responsible one, the one who paid the bills, the one who insured the assets. They were mocking the very stability that they had leached off of for years. I owe a special thank you to Harold and Beatrice, Kyle said, pointing his glass toward my parents. Stand up, you two. Stand up. My parents stood beaming. The room broke into applause. These two are visionaries, Kyle declared. They understood that sometimes you have to make hard decisions to secure the family legacy. They understood that assets in the hands of the fearful are wasted, but assets in the hands of the bold can change the world. They trusted me with the reins. They trusted me to take this family to the next level. And looking around this room today, I think we can all agree that trust was well placed. The applause grew louder. Tiana wiped a tear from her eye. My father looked like he might burst with pride. So let us raise a glass, Kyle shouted, raising his own high. To the future. To the Jenkins Empire. To the fact that we don't just survive, we thrive. And to those who doubted us, well, they can watch from the sidelines while we fly. Cheers! Cheers, the crowd roared back, roared. Glasses clinked. The sound was joyous, infectious, and completely nauseating. I waited. I let the applause reach its crescendo. I let them have their moment of triumph. I let them drink the champagne that I had paid for. I watched Kyle take a long, victorious swallow, throwing his head back like a conquering hero. Then, as the applause began to die down, as people started to turn back to their conversations, I stepped out from behind the pillar. I walked into the center of the room, the red dress blazing like a warning flare. I did not speak. I simply brought my hands together. Clap. The sound was sharp, loud, and singular. It cut through the murmuring crowd like a gunshot. Clap. I took another step forward. People turned to look. Their smiles faltered. Clap. It was a slow, rhythmic applause, mocking, heavy, deliberate. I walked straight toward the fireplace, my eyes locked on Kyle. The room went deadly silent. The jazz band did not start playing again. The waiters stopped moving. All eyes were on me. Kyle lowered his glass. His smile flickered and died. He looked at me, and for the first time since he started his speech, I saw the fear behind the sunglasses. He knew that sound. It was not the sound of congratulations. It was the sound of a clock ticking down to 0. I stopped 10 feet away from him. I stopped clapping. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. I tilted my head to the side, looking him up and down, and then I smiled. "Bravo, Kyle," I said, my voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "That was quite a performance. I especially like the part about leverage. Tell me though, when you talk about fuel for the rocket ship, do you usually mean federal bank fraud? Or is that just a special feature of the Jenkins empire?" The gasp from the crowd was audible. Kyle's face turned a pale shade of gray. Tiana stood up, dropping her glass. It shattered on the floor, but the sound was swallowed by the tension in the room. "Zoe, get out!" my father barked, stepping forward. "You are drunk." "No, Dad," I said, not breaking eye contact with Kyle. "I am just the only one here who knows who actually paid for the champagne." "Isn't that right, Kyle? Why don't you tell everyone where the money really came from? Or should I tell them?" Kyle opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the door, then back at me, then at his Porsche in the driveway. He looked like a trapped animal, and that was exactly where I wanted him. The silence in the room was not empty. It was heavy and suffocating, like the air before a tornado touches down. I stepped up onto the raised stone hearth. My red heels clicked against the granite, a sharp percussive sound that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I was now standing at eye level with Kyle. He was taller than me, but in that moment he looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught playing dress-up in his father's clothes. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He did not resist. He was too paralyzed by shock to stop me. I turned to face the room. My parents were seated in the front row. My mother Beatrice was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. My father Harold had let his cigar go out, the ash falling unnoticed onto his expensive trousers. They stared at me with a mixture of fury and confusion, waiting for me to make a scene, waiting for me to scream or cry so they could dismiss me as the unstable daughter. But I was not going to give them that satisfaction. I was going to give them a deposition. "Is the microphone on?" I tapped it lightly. "Good. I think we need to clear up a few things." Kyle gave such a moving speech about vision and legacy. I think it is only fair that we fact-check a few of those statements. After all, we are family, right? And family is built on truth. I walked to the edge of the hearth, looking down at my father. "Dad, you filed an eviction notice against me on Tuesday. You stood on the sidewalk and told the sheriff that you were the legal owner of this property. Is that correct?" Harold stood up. His face was flushing a deep, dangerous red. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You sit down, Zoe. You are embarrassing yourself. This is my house. I bought it. I paid the down payment years ago. You were just living here." I smiled. It was a cold, surgical smile. "So you are confirming in front of all these witnesses, including your pastor and your business partners, that you, Harold Washington, are the sole legal owner of 4502 Oakwood Drive?" "Yes," he shouted. "And I transferred it to Kyle and Tiana. It is done. It is legal. Now get off that stage before I drag you off." I turned to Kyle. He was sweating now. Beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead, running down behind his dark sunglasses. "And you, Kyle?" I said, my voice soft, but amplified to reach every corner of the room. "You just told everyone that you leveraged this asset, that you used the equity to build your empire. That means you signed a mortgage deed, right? You went to the bank and you signed your name as the owner." Kyle licked his lips. He looked at Tiana, who was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. He had to answer. If he said no, he looked like a fraud. If he said yes, he was walking into my trap. His ego made the decision for him. "Yeah, I signed it," Kyle said, his voice cracking slightly. "The bank approved it. The money is in the account. It is over, Zoe. You lost." I nodded slowly, pretending to absorb this information. "So we have established that you both believe you own this house. You believe you have the legal right to sell it, transfer it, and borrow against it. That is very interesting." I took a step closer to them, lowering the microphone slightly so it felt more intimate, more dangerous. "Because I was looking at the county tax records this morning. And I was looking at the corporate registry for the state of Georgia. And do you know what I found?" I paused. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the punch bowl. I found that 4502 Oakwood Drive is not owned by Harold Washington. It is not owned by Zoe Washington. It is owned by a corporate entity called ZW Holdings LLC. My father frowned. What are you talking about? It is the same thing. It is your company. I signed the transfer. I shook my head. No, Dad. It is not the same thing. You see, when I bought this house, I didn't buy it as an individual. I bought it as a corporation to protect my assets from liability. And according to the operating agreement of ZW Holdings, which is filed with the Secretary of State, there is only one person with signature authority. Me. I looked at Kyle. His skin had gone a pale, waxy gray. So here is the million-dollar question. Actually, it is a $500,000 question. If I am the only person who can sign for the company, and I definitely did not sign anything then, whose signature is on that deed you gave the bank? A murmur rippled through the crowd. People were exchanging looks. The word fraud was whispered somewhere in the back. My father sputtered. I signed it. I am your father. I have power of attorney. No, you don't. I cut him off, my voice sharp as a whip. You have power of attorney for medical decisions if I am incapacitated. You do not have corporate signature authority. You signed a legal document claiming to be an officer of a company you do not own. That is called forgery, Dad. And Kyle. You took that forged document to a federally insured bank and used it to obtain a loan. That is called bank fraud. I turned back to the crowd, addressing the guests who were now looking at their hosts with growing suspicion. My brother-in-law talked about a rocket ship earlier. He was right. He is on a rocket ship. But it is not going to the moon. It is going straight to federal prison, because the document he signed is worthless. The deed is void. But the money he took, the money he spent on that car in the driveway, that crime is very real, Kyle snapped. The fear in his eyes turned to panic. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. Shut up! He screamed, losing all composure. She is lying. She is crazy. Security! Get her out of here. Someone get this witch out of my house. He squeezed my arm hard enough to bruise his fingernails, digging into my skin. The glass of champagne in his other hand sloshed onto my red dress, but I didn't flinch. I looked at the security guard who was pushing his way through the stunned crowd. Get your hands off me, Kyle! I said, my voice low and deadly. Because every second you hold on to me, you are just adding assault to your list of charges. And trust me, your list is already long enough. Kyle shoved me back. I stumbled slightly but caught my balance. The security guard, a burly man in a black suit, reached the hearth. He looked at Kyle, then at me, unsure of who was actually in charge. Escort her out, Kyle yelled, pointing at the door. She is trespassing. I straightened my dress, brushing off the champagne droplets. I looked at the security guard calmly. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I am the owner of this property, and if you touch me, I will sue your security firm into bankruptcy. The guard hesitated. He looked at Kyle's frantic, sweating face, and then at my calm, steely expression. He stopped moving. Kyle let out a frustrated roar. Fine, I will do it myself. He stepped toward me, his fists clenched, ready to physically throw me out of the house he had stolen. But before he could take a swing, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Not one siren, many. They were loud, close, and getting closer. The color drained from Kyle's face completely. He froze his fist mid-air. The guests turned toward the front windows where blue and red lights were already flashing against the glass, reflecting off the white balloons and the banner of lies. I smiled at Kyle. It looks like your ride is here. I hope you packed a bag. Oh, wait. You packed mine. I guess you will have to go empty-handed. I reached into the oversized tote bag I had left near the pillar and pulled out the binder. It was 3 inches thick, heavy with the weight of undeniable facts. I did not hand it to them gently. I stepped forward and slammed it down onto the low coffee table that separated me from my parents. The impact was violent. It shook the table hard enough that a crystal glass of Merlot toppled over. The dark red wine spilled instantly, spreading across the pristine white linen tablecloth like a expanding pool of blood dripping onto the expensive rug beneath. Tiana gasped and jumped back to save her white lace dress, but I did not look at her. My eyes were locked on my father. "You want to talk about ownership?" I said, my voice cutting through the gasp of the crowd. "You want to talk about legality? Let us look at the paperwork." "Open it, Dad." "Go ahead." Harold stared at the binder as if it were a bomb. He did not move. His arrogance was evaporating, replaced by the trembling uncertainty of a man who realizes he has walked into a room he cannot exit. I flipped the cover open myself. The first page was a glossy, high-definition printout of the corporate charter for ZW Holdings, LLC. "You see, this house is not a personal asset," I explained, pointing a manicured red nail at the document. "I transferred the title to a limited liability company 3 years ago. It is a standard asset protection strategy for someone in my tax bracket. Something you would know if you actually understood finance instead of just pretending to." I turned the page. This is the operating agreement. Article 4, Section 2. It states that any transfer, sale, or lien placed on real estate assets held by the company requires dual authentication, a physical signature and a biometric digital key. My fingerprint, encrypted, verified on the blockchain. I looked up at Kyle. He was breathing shallow, rapid breaths, his chest heaving under his sweat-stained dress shirt. "So here is the problem, Kyle. The deed you and Mom and Dad forged, the one where they practiced my signature for weeks. It is a nice art project, really. The loop on the Z was almost perfect, but legally speaking, it is toilet paper. You cannot sign over a corporate asset with a personal signature. The title transfer never happened. The county clerk might have filed it because you bribed someone or caught them on a Friday afternoon, but in the eyes of the law, this house never left my possession." I took a step closer to him. He backed away until his legs hit the stone hearth. "And that brings us to the bank loan." I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a scream. "You took that fake deed to Sovereign Trust. You told them you owned the property. You used it as collateral to borrow $500,000. "Kyle." "Tell her she is lying," Tiana shrieked, clutching her stomach. "Tell her the bank approved it. We have the money. We have the car. We have the money." Kyle croaked, his voice sounding thin and weak. "The money is in the account." "Exactly," I said, delivering the final blow. "The money is in the account, but the collateral does not exist. Do you know what that means, Kyle? It means you did not get a mortgage. You committed federal wire fraud. You obtained $500,000 from a federally insured institution under false pretenses. You didn't just steal from me, you stole from the bank. And unlike me, the bank does not do family therapy. The bank calls the FBI." The color drained from my mother's face. She looked at the spilled wine on the table, then at the terrified face of her son-in-law. She realized finally that her plot had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly. She stood up, her hands shaking. "Zoe, stop this," she pleaded, her voice high and thin. "You are ruining everything. We can fix this. We can just sign the papers now. We can make it legal. Just sign the damn papers, Zoe. Don't send your brother-in-law to jail." I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. "Sign the papers. You want me to become an accomplice to your fraud. You want me to help you cover up the fact that you stole my identity and leveraged my home to pay off a gambling debt." I turned to the guests. The room was paralyzed. Cousins who had ignored my calls were now staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. The neighbors were whispering behind their hands. "He didn't invest that money," I announced, pointing at Kyle. "He didn't build an empire. He took that $500,000 and wired $300,000 of it to an illegal sports betting syndicate in South Chicago this morning, and the rest. He spent it on that car outside." Kyle looked like he was going to vomit. "How do you know that?" he whispered. "Because I am a risk analyst, Kyle," I said. "Finding hidden money is what I do. I know about the debts. I know about the loan sharks. And I know that right now you are technically insolvent. You have spent money that isn't yours on an asset you don't own in a house you are about to be evicted from. Congratulations, I said, grabbing the bottle of champagne from the bucket next to him. I poured a glass, the bubbles fizzing cheerfully in the tense silence. You really did go big. You went straight to a felony Class B. Kyle looked around the room searching for an exit, searching for a lie that could save him. But there were no lies left. The binder on the table was open. The wine was spreading. The truth was out. That is when we heard it. At first, it was just a faint wail in the distance, easily mistaken for city traffic. But then it grew louder, piercing, urgent. The distinct rhythmic yelp of emergency sirens turning onto a residential street. Blue and red lights began to flash against the sheer curtains of the living room windows, pulsing in time with the racing heartbeats of everyone in the room. Tiana ran to the window. "Oh my God," she screamed. "It is the police! There are 3 cars. They are blocking the driveway." I took a sip of the champagne. It was crisp cold and tasted like absolute victory. "I told you," I whispered to Kyle, who was now trembling so violently the ice in his glass was rattling. "I told you that you were playing with the wrong sister." The music had stopped. The party was over. The only sound left was the wail of the sirens and the soft drip of red wine falling from the table to the floor, counting down the seconds until the handcuffs clicked. The front door of the house did not just open, it was thrown open with a force that rattled the expensive crystal chandelier in the foyer. The illusion of the sophisticated garden party shattered instantly, replaced by the visceral, chaotic energy of a police raid. Sheriff Patterson walked in first, but he was not wearing his dress uniform or his polite country club smile. He was wearing his tactical vest, his hand resting on his holster, flanked by 4 uniformed deputies who fanned out into the room with practiced military precision. The jazz band dropped their instruments. The guests scrambled back, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks, creating a wide berth between the law and the family standing by the fireplace. The air in the room shifted from the scent of expensive perfume to the sharp metallic tang of fear. Sheriff Patterson marched straight through the parted crowd. He did not look at my father, who had stepped forward with a hand raised in a futile attempt to regain control. He walked directly up to the hearth where Kyle was standing, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. "Kyle Jenkins Patterson," boomed his voice, filling the vaulted ceiling. "You are under arrest." Kyle stumbled back, his heel catching on the stone hearth. "For what?" he squeaked, his voice cracking. "This is a misunderstanding. I can explain." "There is nothing to explain," son Patterson said, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratchet clicking open was the loudest thing in the room. "You are being charged with federal mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You knowingly used forged documents to secure funds from a federally insured bank. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Now." Kyle did not move. He looked at Tiana, then at my father, his eyes wide and wet with panic. 2 deputies stepped forward, grabbing his arms and spinning him around with zero gentleness. They slammed him face first against the mantel right next to the framed photos of himself he had just put up. The guests gasped as the cuffs clicked tight. Click, click, the sound of his freedom ending. My father found his voice then. Patterson Harold shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "What the hell do you think you are doing? We played golf on Sunday. You cannot arrest my son-in-law in my own house. I command you to stop this." Patterson turned slowly to look at my father. His expression was one of cold professional disgust. "I am not your golf buddy today, Harold. I am the sheriff. And this is not your house." Patterson nodded to the other 2 deputies. They moved past him, heading straight for my parents. "Harold and Beatrice Washington Patterson," announced, reading from a paper in his hand. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery in the 1st degree, and identity theft. You knowingly facilitated this transaction and impersonated the property owner." My mother let out a shrill scream that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. "No, You cannot touch me. I am a deaconess. I am a mother. This is my daughter's fault. She set us up. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent, one of the deputies said, pulling her arms behind her back. The silver bracelets on her wrists clinked against the handcuffs. My mother looked at me, her eyes bulging with hatred. Zoe, tell them. Tell them you gave us permission. Fix this. I stood by the pillar holding my glass of champagne. I took a slow sip, letting the bubbles burst on my tongue. I did not say a word. I simply watched as the facade of their respectability was stripped away layer by layer in front of the very people they had tried to impress. Then Tiana snapped. The reality of the situation finally pierced through her narcissism. Her husband was in cuffs, her parents were being detained, her party was a crime scene. She looked at me standing there calm and untouched in my red dress, and something inside her broke. You witch? Tiana screamed a guttural primal sound. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurled it at me. It missed my head by inches, shattering against the pillar behind me, sending shards of glass raining down onto the floor. She did not stop there. Ignoring her pregnancy, ignoring her white lace gown, she lunged across the room, her fingernails hooked like claws. You did this. You ruined my life. I will kill you. I did not flinch. I did not have to. Before she could get within 5 feet of me, a female deputy intercepted her, grabbing her by the shoulders and holding her back. Tiana thrashed against the officer's grip, kicking and screaming, her flower crown falling off and being trampled underfoot. Ma'am, calm down or you will be restrained, the deputy warned. Let me go. She is the devil. She is jealous of me. She wants my baby to die. Tiana was sobbing now, mascara running down her face, snot bubbling at her nose. It was ugly, it was raw, and it was being recorded by 50 smartphones held by 50 horrified guests. Patterson looked at the chaos, then signaled his team. Get them out of here. The deputies began to march them toward the door. The walk of shame had begun. They had to walk past the cousins they had bragged to. They had to walk past the pastor they had lied to. They had to walk past the neighbors they had sneered at. As they dragged Kyle past my father, the alliance finally crumbled. Kyle, realizing he was facing federal time, decided he was not going down alone. He twisted his head back, his face contorted with fear and rage. It was his idea. Kyle shouted, jerking his head toward my father. Harold told me to do it. He said Zoe would never find out. He told me to sign the deed. I didn't want to. He forced me. He needed the money to look rich. You liar! My father roared back, struggling against the deputy holding him. You came to me with the plan. You said you were a genius. You gambled it all away, you worthless piece of trash. I watched them turn on each other, tearing at each other's throats like rats in a sinking ship. The family loyalty Tiana had preached about was gone, evaporated the moment the consequences arrived. As they reached the door, Kyle looked back one last time. He looked at the house. He looked at the Porsche. And then he looked at me. I raised my glass to him in a silent toast. Goodbye, Kyle, I whispered. The front door opened, and the flashing blue lights from outside flooded the foyer, illuminating their exit. The guests parted like the Red Sea, shrinking away from the tainted family. I stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by broken glass and spilled wine, the undisputed owner of the wreckage. The silence that followed was heavy, shocked, and absolutely delicious. The flashing blue lights painted the front lawn in a strobe effect of tragedy and justice, turning the manicured landscaping into a surreal disco of consequences. The guests had retreated to the edges of the property, standing in small, huddled groups near their luxury cars, whispering behind their hands. They were witnessing the fall of the House of Washington, and they could not look away. I stood on the porch step, the cool night air hitting my bare arms, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a burning, blazing heat in my chest that felt dangerously like freedom. My father had already been placed in the back of the second cruiser, his head hung low, defeated by his own hubris. But my mother was putting up a fight. Not a physical fight like Tiana, but a psychological one. She was dragging her feet, making the deputies work for every inch of progress down the driveway. Her silver suit was rumpled, the silk stained with sweat and possibly wine. Her expensive hat lay trampled in the grass somewhere near the azalea bushes. As the deputy guided her toward the third patrol car, she locked eyes with me. She planted her feet, digging her heels into the pavement with surprising strength. "Wait!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I need to speak to my daughter. Let me speak to her. It is a family matter." The deputy looked at me, seeking confirmation. I gave a slight nod. I walked down the steps slowly, my red dress flowing around me like a royal train. I stopped 3 feet away from her, just out of reach of her handcuffed hands. I looked at her face. The meticulously applied makeup was ruined. Mascara ran in dark rivers down her cheeks, settling into the deep lines around her mouth. Her lipstick was smeared. For the first time in my life, I did not see the terrifying matriarch who controlled our lives with a glance. I saw a frightened, desperate old woman who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. "Zoe," she gasped, her chest heaving. "Zoe, baby, listen to me. You cannot let them take me. I am your mother. I gave you life. I wiped your tears. How can you be so cruel?" I tilted my head, looking at her with a detached curiosity. "Cruel," I repeated, the word tasting strange on my tongue. "You think this is cruelty, mother?" "Yes," she sobbed, tears dripping off her chin. "This is madness. We made a mistake. Fine. We admit it. But you do not send your own mother to prison. You do not destroy your family over money. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the loan verbally. Please, Zoe. If you love me, you will fix this." She was doing it again. Even in handcuffs, she was trying to manipulate reality. She was trying to rewrite the script where she was the victim and I was the ungrateful villain. She wanted me to perjure myself, to take on her crime, to save her reputation while sacrificing my own. It was the same pattern we had danced to for 30 years. Tiana breaks a vase, Zoe takes the blame. Tiana needs money. Zoe pays the bill. Tiana steals a house. Zoe is supposed to smile. But the music had stopped. I took a step closer, invading her personal space. I smelled the stale perfume and the fear radiating off her skin. "Do not talk to me about love, mother," I said, my voice low and steady. "You do not love me. You love what I can provide. You love my credit score. You love my silence. But you never loved me. Because if you loved me, you would not have thrown me out on the street at 4 in the morning like a stray dog." Beatrice flinched as if I had slapped her, but she recovered quickly, switching tactics from guilt to bargaining. "We will pay you back," she pleaded, her eyes darting to the watching neighbors. "We will sell the car. We will sell everything. Just drop the charges. Think about what people will say. Think about the church. You will shame us all." I laughed. It was a soft, dark sound. "The church. That is what you are worried about. Not the fact that you committed a felony, not the fact that you stole my identity. You are worried about the gossip at Sunday service." I leaned in until my face was inches from hers. I wanted her to see the absolute resolve in my eyes. I wanted her to look into the soul of the daughter she had underestimated. "Mom, do you remember Tuesday night?" She blinked, confused by the question. "What?" "Tuesday night," I repeated. "You stood right there across the street by the truck. You watched the sheriff lock me out. You watched me standing in the rain in my pajamas, shivering. Do you remember what you said to me?" Beatrice swallowed hard. She looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "You shouted across the street," I whispered, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You said you should have done what family asked. You said I needed to learn to be reasonable. You said I needed to know my place." I stood up straight, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "Well, Mother, I learned my lesson. I am being very reasonable. I am following the rules. The law says that forgery is a crime. The law says that fraud has consequences. I am just doing exactly what a good citizen should do. I am letting justice take its course." "Zoe, please," she wailed, her composure shattering completely. "I am old. I will die in there." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you signed my name." I said, cold as ice. I nodded to the deputy. Take her. No. No. Zoe! Beatrice screamed as the deputy gripped her arm and forced her toward the open back door of the cruiser. She struggled, kicking out her legs, losing one of her silver shoes on the asphalt. It was a pathetic, undignified end to her reign. She turned her head back, looking at me one last time. Her eyes were wide with a horror that had nothing to do with prison and everything to do with the realization that she had created her own destroyer. I watched as the deputy pushed her head down to clear the doorframe. She collapsed onto the hard plastic seat of the police car. The deputy slammed the door shut. Thud! The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood, final and absolute. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of a toxic cycle breaking. I watched her face pressed against the window, shouting words I could not hear. I did not wave. I did not look away. I simply stood there, breathing in the cool night air, realizing for the first time in 32 years that I was actually breathing. The weight was gone. The obligation was gone. I was an orphan by choice, and it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. The silence that descended on the house was heavier than the noise had ever been. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the stunned, hollow silence of a battlefield after the last cannon has fired. The police cruisers were gone. The guests had fled their luxury cars, peeling out of the driveway in a desperate race to distance themselves from the scandal. I stood alone in the center of the living room, the red silk of my dress the only vibrant thing left in a landscape of gray ruin. I looked around at the wreckage of Tiana's fantasy. The white balloons that had cascaded down the staircase were starting to deflate, looking like shriveled ghosts. The expensive catering spread lay untouched and spoiling on the sideboards, a feast for no one. A slice of gender reveal cake sat on the floor where it had been dropped, the pink frosting smeared into the hardwood like a wound. The air still smelled of expensive perfume and fear, a cloying mix that made my stomach turn. I walked over to the coffee table where the red wine had spilled. The stain had set a dark, jagged island on the white rug. It was ruined, just like the sofa where my father had sat like a king, just like the hearth where Kyle had lied to the world, just like this family. I felt a vibration in my hand. It was my phone. Messages were pouring in from cousins, aunts, and friends of the family. Zoe, is it true? Zoe, call me. Zoe, how could you? I didn't read them. I didn't delete them. I simply swiped them away. I wasn't interested in the commentary track of my life anymore. I was only interested in the edit. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Marcus's wife, Sarah. She was the top luxury real estate agent in Atlanta. It was late, almost 9 o'clock on a Saturday, but she answered on the first ring. Zoe, I heard about the raid. It is all over Twitter. Are you okay? I am fine, Sarah. I said, my voice echoing in the empty vaulted room. I am better than fine. But I have a new listing for you. Listing? Sarah asked, confused. Which property? 4502 Oakwood Drive, I said, looking around at the vaulted ceilings I used to love. I want you to list it Monday morning. Zoe. That is your home, Sarah said gently. You fought so hard to get it back. You just kicked them out. Don't make a rash decision. Sleep on it. You can renovate. You can exorcise the bad energy. No, Sarah, I said, walking toward the fireplace. This isn't about bad energy. It is about contamination. This house has been poisoned. Every wall remembers their lies. Every room has heard them plotting against me. I don't want to renovate. I don't want to smudge it with sage. I want it gone. I paused, kicking a discarded napkin with the tip of my shoe. I want to sell it fully furnished, as is. I don't want the furniture. I don't want the art. I don't want the rugs. I don't want anything that they touched. Sell it to a developer. Sell it to a stranger. I don't care if you have to knock it down and sell the dirt. Just get it off my name. There was a silence on the other line, then the professional click of a keyboard. Okay, Zoe. I understand. I will have the paperwork ready by noon on Monday. Where will you go? I have a penthouse in the city, I said, remembering the view of the skyline that didn't include a view of my parents' house across the street. A place with a doorman who actually checks ID. A place with no guest room. I hung up the phone. It was done. The asset that had been the source of all this envy, all this betrayal, was no longer mine. It was just inventory. I looked up at the mantel. The only thing left on it was a large framed portrait that Tiana had hung up earlier that day. It was a picture of the four of them. My parents, Kyle and Tiana. They were wearing matching white outfits standing on a beach somewhere, smiling the kind of smiles that cost thousands of dollars in dental work. They looked perfect. They looked happy. They looked like a family that didn't exist. I reached up and took the heavy frame in both hands. The gold leaf felt cold against my skin. I looked at their faces one last time. My mother's calculating eyes, my father's weak chin, Tiana's smug grin, Kyle's empty stare. They were strangers to me now, prisoners of their own greed. I didn't throw it on the floor. That would have been too messy. Instead, I turned to the gas fireplace. It was not lit, but the iron grate was black and gaping. I tossed the portrait into the firebox. It landed with a heavy clatter, the glass cracking down the middle, splitting the perfect family right in two. I didn't light a match. I didn't need to burn it. Leaving them in the dark in the dust, in a house that was being sold to the highest bidder, was a far worse punishment. They were just debris now, garbage left behind by the previous tenants. I turned my back on the fireplace. I grabbed my clutch from the table. I walked to the front door, my heels clicking a final rhythm on the marble. Click, click, click. Gone. I stepped out onto the porch. The night was quiet. The crickets were chirping, indifferent to the human drama that had just unfolded. The air tasted sweet, clean, and completely mine. I walked down the steps, past the trampled flower beds, past the tire marks left by the police cars. An Uber was waiting at the curb, its engine idling softly. I opened the door and slid into the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Anywhere but here," I said, leaning back against the seat and closing my eyes. "Take me to the Ritz-Carlton downtown." As the car pulled away, I didn't look out the window. I didn't glance back at the house that had been my dream and my nightmare. I didn't check to see if the lights were still on. I just watched the road ahead, stretching out into the city full of lights and strangers, and a future that belonged only to me. The rearview mirror was for people who had something to go back to. I had nothing back there but ghosts, and I was done being haunted. 6 months is a long time. In the corporate world, it is 2 fiscal quarters. In a baby's life, it is the difference between crawling and walking. But in the federal correctional system, 6 months is just the blink of an eye. I stood on the terrace of my new penthouse on the 45th floor, holding a glass of Chateau Margaux that cost more than my father's first car. The wind up here was different. It was cleaner. It didn't carry the scent of desperation or the heavy, humid weight of the suburbs. Below me, the city of Atlanta was a grid of golden light, moving and breathing like a living thing. But up here, there was only silence, and the kind of peace that you cannot buy, you have to earn. I took a slow sip of the wine, letting the complex notes of currant and oak settle on my tongue. I thought about Kyle. I didn't want to, but the letter from the Department of Justice had arrived this morning confirming his transfer. The judge had not been impressed by his tearful apology or his attempt to blame my father. The federal sentencing guidelines for bank fraud and wire fraud are mathematical and unforgiving. 8 years. That was the price of his ambition. He was currently sitting in a cell in a minimum security facility in Alabama, wearing a jumpsuit that definitely wasn't tailored. There would be no more luxury cars, no more speeches about empires, just a 6x8 concrete box, and a lot of time to think about the difference between a visionary and a thief. My parents fared slightly better, but only slightly. They avoided prison time thanks to a plea deal that required them to liquidate all remaining assets to pay restitution to the bank. They lost the truck. They lost their savings. And of course, they lost the house on Oakwood Drive. The last I heard, they were living in a subsidized senior housing complex on the south side. It is a clean, safe place, but it lacks the prestige they built their entire identities around. There are no dinner parties there, no deacons coming over for cigars, just small rooms and the crushing weight of knowing that they traded their daughter's love for a lottery ticket that never paid out. My mother tried to call me once a few weeks ago. I watched the phone ring until it went to voicemail. I didn't listen to the message. I didn't need to. The silence was my answer. And Tiana, the golden child, the princess who believed the world owed her a living. Reality hit her the hardest because she had no armor to protect her. With Kyle in prison and our parents destitute, she had to do something she had never done in her life. She had to work. I saw her last week, actually. I was stopping by a grocery store near the old neighborhood and I saw her at Register 4. She was wearing a smock scanning items for a woman who looked a lot like our mother used to look. She looked tired. Her hair wasn't done. The sparkle was gone from her eyes, replaced by the dull resignation of survival. I didn't go in her line. I didn't gloat. I just walked out and got into my car. She wanted to build a home on my foundation, and now she was learning that you cannot build a castle on quicksand. I walked to the edge of the railing, looking down at the tiny cars moving on the highway. I felt a sense of vertigo, not from the height, but from how close I had come to losing myself. If I had signed those papers, if I had accepted their guilt trip, if I had let them define my worth, I would be down there with them, drowning in their chaos. I turned away from the view and looked directly into the camera lens, breaking the barrier between my story and your reality. The wind caught the hem of my silk robe, but I stood still, grounded and unshakable. They called me selfish. They called me cold. They told me that family means setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. But I want you to look at me now. I am standing here whole. I am standing here free, and I am standing here with my dignity intact. There is a lesson here that cost me a family to learn, but I am giving it to you for free. Do not let anyone tell you that you are wrong for protecting what you have built. Do not let anyone guilt you into financing their delusions. Your hard work, your sweat, your late nights, and your sacrifices belong to you. You are not a safety net for people who refuse to learn how to fly. If standing up for yourself makes you the villain in their story, then be the villain. Be the villain who sleeps soundly at night. Be the villain who owns their own home. Be the villain who survives. I raised my glass to the camera, a silent toast to every black sheep who turned out to be the wolf. To the villains, I whispered. I took one last sip of wine and turned back to the city lights. The past was a dark room I had closed the door on. The future was wide open, and for the first time in my life it belonged entirely to me. Zoe's victory teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. Blind loyalty to toxic family is not a virtue. It is self-destruction. We are often taught to sacrifice everything for blood, but true family never asks you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Financial literacy and legal foresight aren't just professional skills. They are shields that protect our dignity. Never apologize for defending what you have built. Sometimes the only way to find peace is to evict the people who treat your heart like a vacancy. Have you ever had to choose between your self-respect and your family's approval? Share your story in the comments below.